What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 13.3 is coming out, to be fair, in about a day and a half. As of time of recording, we're about 24 hours away from sort of east of the Atlantic Ocean getting it, and about 36 hours away from the west of the Atlantic Ocean getting it, roughly. That's maybe not the best way of describing it, but anyway, normally patch notes come out, and the very next day is the patch. This is not going to be the case here. It's going to be another day beyond that, so even though it's already written out here, still the timeline of this one. So this is a patch that I did some work on, so we'll talk about what I did specifically in more depth and overall give props for their due and everything else. So let's get into the first thing of the patch, which is Aurelion Sol is getting a huge update. I played exactly one game of new Aurelion Sol in playtest around 2 to 3 weeks ago. I did very, very poorly on him. I'm already not a good mid laner, and I barely knew what new Aurelion Sol did. He seems really cool, though. So the infinite stacking, the big thing is that he's an infinite stacking passive. I think infinite stacking passives are really, really cool design space. We only have so many in the game, and I'm glad that Aurelion Sol is getting one himself. I think it's actually really, really interesting. So ultimately, you're adding more % health damage on Q. This sort of burst thing is like every 1 second or so during the channel, you do like some % health damage. That's getting increased as you get more stacks. The amount of distance you fly with your W, it's now a long distance dash that gets broken if you get stunned. At least when I played as it was, and I'm pretty sure it's still gonna be the case here. E is... It's kind of like a slow rel ultimate, right? You put it on the ground, things get sucked in. It executes things when they are low health. It's actually great for chunking down minion waves because you get stacks off of executing minions with your E. You also get stacks off of killing champions. The execute, as it gets bigger, you can start, killing enemy champs from higher points of health. Definitely pretty powerful tool there. And ours is like a really cool large AoE nuke that seems to evolve as you get Stardust picked up. So every 75 Stardust, it transforms into a bigger ultimate. Overall, really cool character. Again, you channel Q on people. You can channel Q while flying with W. E is a circle on the ground. R is circle on the ground. Overall, seems like a really cool character, and gonna look forward to that. But I don't generally spend a lot of time running down reworks. You'll see when it goes live. Hopefully, it's really cool. Let's go into the actual changes to individual champions on a smaller scope. First up is Amumu, who is getting pretty simple changes. He is mostly getting targeted for... I guess, to be fair, some early jungle clear, as well as overall mana cost as support Amumu. This will, I believe this is targeted at support Amumu specifically. He is too high of win rate. I guess, to be fair, in jungle and support for, around 60% of the player base, roughly sub-plat, mid-gold, and lower. Yeah, just overall, this champion actually just does really, really well in the hands of many people. I know we don't see much in pro. We did see a Spica Amumu game last week in the LCS, so he even got some pro presence. But yeah, Amumu overall is doing too well. Demonic Embrace got nerfed. The item is, of course, still very, very good. He's also learning that you can build Radiant Virtue. That item is also very good. I am hopefully nerfing it this patch. We'll see what actually happens out of that one. But yeah, changes to Amumu. Let's go ahead and look at the math in this one, ultimately. So here is his Q mana cost before and after. Assuming you were going to max it, looks like second. This would be like a standard jungle order where you'd max Q second as most likely. Doesn't matter a ton. The mana cost is 5 higher. If you're playing support Amumu, you're not usually running out of mana a ton either. So it's not a very big nerf there, but it will have some level of effect. Bigger one is honestly 15 damage down on E will slow down his jungle clear. Now what's interesting is this won't tend to slow down raptors and wolves very much, since essentially as you spam E on the camp, you kill the small raptors really, really fast anyway, and then you just kill the rest of the camp without E doing anything. And so it's like, you're going to cast E until all the small camps die anyway. This will matter more on your first clear against Big Krug, where it's not getting a ton of resets, and it turns out you're just kind of slowly burning that thing down. It'll matter when you're fighting blue and whatnot, but if you have 5 small raptors alive and they're resetting your E to a 0.5 second cooldown, it almost doesn't matter what the damage is sort of my read on that one. And it's not going to mean a ton, but certainly it still will slow down his clear to some degree, of course. Yeah, that's kind of the TLDR. It's some nerfs to Amumu. Him having a better late game is fine, I suppose. It's not a big deal, kind of regardless, but Yeah, you're probably still going to max E, and then honestly Q and W were actually pretty comparable as what you would max second, but yeah, relatively small difference. Again, this will still slow his clear down a little bit. Of course, mana costs going up matters some. In general, I don't feel like junglers tend to have many mana cost constraints as support. I've only really played one game of support Amumu over the last couple of weeks, so I don't have a strong grasp on how he plays, but it'll mean some. He'll lose some win rate. I don't think it's going to be very large. Maybe I'm wrong, and it turns out the Tantrum doing 15 10 less damage at rank 2 is going to really matter on these like level 4 skirmishes and you're ganking and whatnot. This could actually mean a lot. So I could be really understanding this, and this is actually a really big deal. I guess we'll have to see. Annie is getting a really cool set of updates here. So easy stuff right here. Power Mania fully stacks when she spawns, when she respawns. It's not on recall, at least according to the wording here. But good thing so that Annie can, you know, learn W, not spam it as she's walking into base, or learn Q and Q summon at level 1. Makes her stronger as part of an invade. Certainly makes her a bit of a stronger support overall because you can stun as part of the level 1 trade, right? Certainly matters there. Molten Shield getting updated to be a bit more interesting. So it's 20-0 more shield. This actually makes it more of a 1-point wonder. You saw the scaling on ability rank was very high. That's brought down a little bit as rank 1 is better. Big thing though is a huge AP ratio increase to the shield as well. This is still a fairly soft AP ratio for at least it would be if this was an offensive damage ability. 55% AP for 220 damage is relatively soft, but shields can be really scary if you let someone scale defensive with pure offense. It's not that it is bad or is wrong. I don't think this is like a wrong change or anything, but it can be scary when by scaling offense you get more durable, because then what's the counterplay to you gaining 100 health when you buy a death cap? Just can be scary, that's all. Cooldown down by 2 seconds, also pretty nice. So just, you know, huge love to the ability, overall feeling a whole lot better to use. Retaliation damage also up by quite a bit, up by 50%, and the AP ratio itself is actually doubled, so more than 50% in all context, basically. But it can only reflect damage once, and I kind of like this, actually. The shield isn't that big, especially if it's a 1-pointer, and it's only blocking 60 damage. And yeah, you have some ability power, so like at your first mythic, it's 115 or something. It's like still not a lot, right? You're blocking 1 spell, so you're kind of only reflecting 1 hit anyway. And it's saying, yeah, you're only reflecting 1 hit per person hitting you is actually kind of nice. I actually like that it's chunky. I think it's actually kind of cool. So really big fan of these changes as well. This might mean that the total damage out of E is lower despite this ratio and this base damage going up. It only reflects once per target per shield. Well, per target's thing. So like to be clear, right? Per target per shield, yeah, against one per target per shield. So Cassiopeia, she might auto you and Q you and EU. You're only going to take 1 reflection damage here. Cool, there we go. Move on from there. Tibbers getting just some simply more health, some more resists scaling with AP, and then a bit more move speed at later rank. Let's talk about the actual numbers here. Okay, so first up is Annie's E shield and damage. So the amount of flat shield, of course, again, flat 20 up and double the AP ratio. Or sorry, flat 20 up and higher AP ratio, nearly doubling, right? 35 becomes 55. Here's your numbers. It's about 50% more shielding. As time goes on and you rank it towards the very end of the game, the difference of flat 20 is no longer flat 20, it's just a flat 0, so it's the AP ratio carrying it. But yeah, certainly a lot more shielding early on in the game, and it's enough to, you know, where it actually matters, which is kind of cool. Additionally, here is the amount of damage it refunds. Again, 50% more base damage, double the AP ratio, and you can see the amount of damage it can deal is certainly much higher. But again, this maybe could have hit someone twice, it only hits once, so there are certainly cases where it can be weaker, right? Of course it can be weaker, but it's certainly going to be chunkier, and I think it's always a good thing. I'm a really big fan of abilities trying to be chunkier, because it'll make them feel better even if they aren't as strong. And then, hey, if this ends up being a nerf to Annie, they can just buff Annie, and she's going to be a cooler champion overall. So huge fan of the changes here. That's really nice. We can talk about Tibbers. This is actually pretty small, to be honest. So here is Tibbers' durability with the health, armor, and MR all factored in. It is not a huge increase because the base values didn't change any. 1300 to 3100, 30 to 90, all that's the same. But AP ratio scaling the health, AP ratio scaling the armor, MR, and as you get ability power, it's 8 to 15% more durability. It's not a very big deal. It's not a huge amount, but it is something, and it's nice to see. Otherwise, looking at this, right, just a simple look at the move speed being a little bit higher. Honestly, 350 is relatively slow. This is literally any time with boots 1 has at least 350, not counting, I guess, Rel. But as you get boots 2, as you get anything else like a Zeal or a Cosmic Drive or whatever, Stride Breaker, all this kind of stuff, you get beyond it. I don't think it's bad if Tibbers has 400 move speed at level 16 plus. That seems totally reasonable. Certainly, it's gonna run around really fast. I think it's fine. Overall, cool changes. I really like this. It's not a lot of direct burst damage up. She's already pretty strong burst mage, but all these things are going to feel better, and I think it's really awesome. So cool changes to Annie, and we go on to the next one. Jarvan is getting relatively simple buffs. He does get really injured on his first clear. So +2 armor helps with that, as does it increase to how much his shield does. So the flat value of the shield is the same. So is the per target percent health damage. That's also going nowhere, but a bonus AD ratio makes the shield a more potent shield as you build him out. Keep in mind, cooldown also down by a second means he has more access to shielding, more access to the slows, and the shield duration, honestly, 5 seconds to 4 doesn't really matter anyway. I think this is just good cleanup. I think it's wise that this happens in the first place, that I don't think the shield should have been 5 seconds long. Honestly, this is a kind of ability that could decay. I'm actually a big fan of shields decaying and hastes decaying. I just think it makes the abilities kind of feel a bit better. There's some stuff around that. I don't want to get into it right now. Like, I'm just not necessarily correct, essentially, but shield duration down doesn't really matter. It's functionally a non-nerf. Let's talk about the actual amount of changes to Jarvan. So here is how much physical damage he can withstand if he doesn't buy any other armor items. Doesn't have any armor runes. Here's just how much physical damage he can withstand before and after the changes. 1.5 to about 1% more durability against physical damage. This does multiply his health as well as his health regen. So if he goes Merc Treads, if he goes Gore Drinker, if he goes Sterix Gauge, if he goes Black Cleaver, if he goes Kempug Chainsword, right, none of these items have armor on them, he gets 1.5 to 1% more durability against physical damage as a result of that. Not bad. It's a little bit higher if they go lethality, because that's how lethality and armor interact. The more lethality they have, the more armor you want. Okay, great, moving forward. But here's the W shield for Jarvan. So, of course, if no one is around, you're just hitting just camps. It's 60 to 140 baseline on the shield. That's what it was. Here is it with an approximation of bonus AD ratios, and it scales up to, yeah, double-ish. And, of course, since you max the ability at the very, very end, level 13 is your, like, biggest change there. And, yeah, if you were pressing W to, like, tank red buff as you were jungling at level 13 with, 2 to 3 items, this shield is 2.5 times as good. That's a really, really big increase, right? This is a very, very large increase to the base value of the shield. What's interesting, though, is even though it has a % health ratio, if you have 5 enemy champions nearby, which is very unrealistic, but let's say you do have 5 enemy champions nearby. This is also, by the way, assuming you're building, like, Eclipse Duskblade. Okay, you can't get both those. Eclipse Yomu's Death's Dance, Wit's End, Maw. Like, they don't have health on them. You're just doing flat AD with defensive stats on them, steel caps, things like that. Which, there are builds that do that, right? Frozen Heart is a pretty core item on him a lot of the time. If you don't have any bonus health in the kit, here is how much the shield would shield you before. And it would actually scale up to 300. So you would actually almost double the value of your shield if you were casting in a team fight, which is not bad, right? That was actually what it did. Of course, you still have all those health ratios, but you also still have your bonus AD ratios here. And so again, you still have a pretty substantially 50% higher shield with, plus 90 or so on the shield at this point with 100 something AD. Yeah, going to feel pretty solid here. So definitely a very meaningful increase to shield power, especially, in the mid game as you get around to like 1 mythic or so. It's a pretty substantial bump, and this should be felt pretty well. So I'm a big fan of this one. Again, the cooldown going down is meaningful as well. I really don't want to undersell this because you will get that second shield off much more reliably. And, in a world where you would have died at 8 seconds but got the shield, like, the first shield kept your life long enough to get the second shield off. Like, this can be a really big deal. I don't think it's huge. We're not going to see, like, 4% win rate on Jarvan. I don't expect anyway. But definitely going to be pretty meaningful, and this is cool stuff for Jarvan. Kassadin is certainly doing far too well. He is always meant to be a high-skill champion. He's got ability combos. He's got, pick your moment to all in with the R and get someone over the wall. There's some really interesting sort of required choices here with the champion. He's meant to be a big brain champion, right? And that's just fine. He's got very significant win rate skew with MMR. MMR tightly correlates with game hours played, which tightly correlates with number of games on the champion. So unsurprisingly, people who are in Challenger, aka those who have played 150 games this season, tend to have a lot of games in Kassadin, more so than someone who's played 10 games and is bronze. 10 games, didn't play preseason, and is in bronze, right? Like, they're just going to be better at Kassadin than someone who hasn't put the games on, right? This is going to be true. So there's an MMR skew just based on learning a new champion. That's kind of always going to be the case with almost any champion coming out. Other than that, so there is some softening here, right? Health growth is going to tend to be a somewhat lower elo skewed stat, since higher skilled players earn gold, and so their base stats mean less than their gold scaling. It's a very minor thing, it's not a huge deal, but it does give them some compensation. Overall, though, Q3 knockup duration is down by 0.35 seconds. Q3's stun duration, which is functionally attached to the knockup duration, has been brought down a bit as well. It was fuzzy 1 to 1.25, now it's just a flat 1, which means if you have around 35% tenacity, guess what happens? It's 0.65, right? Instead of being guaranteed 1 second of crowd control, and then maybe tenacity matters, you are never stunned for more than 1 second, and you can, in fact, break out of your stun really quickly and get to act if you get tenacity. I'm actually a really big fan of things like this, where, hey, there's like a baseline of how much it's going to CC you. I actually really, really like CC patterns like this. I think Nautilus works the same way, where there's a knockup and a stun attached. Alistar Q is also like this, by the way. I'm just going to keep listing champions. Because it allows it to have like a guaranteed baseline. Like, no matter how much tenacity you have, no matter how much of whatever's going on, I have this much CC. I think that is good. Like, there is a functional hard cap on tenacity, I think is a good thing. So that your abilities can feel impactful and actually stop things. It also allows the animations to still flow, and that's all wonderful. But then having a stun attached, essentially during the entire duration, that's affected by tenacity, allows you to have tenacity matter. Like, I think it's a really, really good thing. So I'm a very big fan of this one. It means that there was a very obvious knockup duration versus stun duration. And this might look weird because before it was, 1 second to 1 second kind of, but it would be fuzzy. It would be 1 second to up to 1.25. Now there's clearly a separation here. And now clearly Merc Treads are going to affect this. But I'm a really big fan of this. Like, design-wise, I actually really, really dig this. Next up is Pathmaker. I am not a very big fan of short stuns having their CC durations scale. I think like potencies can scale, like a slow goes from a 20% to an 80% slow. This like doubling its CC duration to me, like I just really, really dislike that because it makes the learnability of the character, both on the dealing combos end, which is maybe okay-ish, but on the receiving end, we're like, I'm not expected to master Cassante to play against Cassante, but learning like, oh no, sometimes his stuns are like double the duration based on ability rank. Like, I don't mind Morgana Q being like 2 to 3 seconds or whatever the actual numbers are, but like something like that. It's like, yeah, it's a long route that gets a little bit longer sometimes. Nautilus R also scales from 1 to 2 seconds based on ulti rank, but it's a long stun that becomes a longer stun. Like, that's more okay to me, where this is like, yep, it's a long duration CC. I should cleanse and flash away after I get knocked up. Like, that's just how the character works. So I'm glad this is at least being flattened somewhat. I really wouldn't have minded a flat 0.35 period and be like, yeah, you just don't tap this thing. But I don't know. It's a really minor thing. Either way, this is still, of course, a nerf. And even if this is my individual proclivity around how CC duration should scale, it's at least going in the right direction for what I believe, but doesn't mean I'm right about everything. Also, All Out gonna drop more of your bonus resists, which is just a good thing, right? The entire point of All Out is that you're actually meant to be fairly squishy, and this is meant to be a pretty big difference in terms of how, much you can be knocked down. Keep in mind, he keeps all his base armor and MR. If he's already at half HP, he functionally doesn't lose any health for pressing this button. So, if he goes from 200 armor to 135, that's not actually that big of a change. Going from 200 to 215 is certainly a bigger one. I mean, this could almost go to 0. This could be all your bonus reses go away. I'm not saying it actually should, but like, he has baseline armor and baseline MR, and he still gets some of what he's earned from items. Like, yeah, it turns out the guy is actually tanky when he has half of a tank's health bar, and that health bar, has a Radiant Virtue and a Thorn Mail and, something else onto it, right? And I know he actually goes like Iceborne Gauntlet, but you know what I mean, right? So anyway, like all of these changes, like directionally, I believe design-wise, like I love the design direction of all these changes. I did not do them, but I fucking love these changes, and this is really good. So let's talk about what's going on here. Cassante base health, of course, is up. Yes, it's very, very high. 2500 is rather on the high end for League of Legends. Yep, it's kind of his job. He's a fighter warden, like that's him. Here is the tap W stun duration. You max W second, that's the build. And here we are with this one. It was going to be hard to math this one out, so I didn't, but off we go. Next up is Kassadin. So Kassadin is the first champion in this patch where I shipped the nerfs here. I picked him up after our State of the Game meeting, which was last Monday. I grabbed... first Lee Sin and Kayle. Kassadin was sort of like, there's like a stack rank of what we're intending to ship, and it's like, if we have time, like grab these. And Kassadin was like the first one on the wait list, essentially. And I'm like, okay, I can get Lee Sin and Kayle pretty easily. I want to grab Kassadin because I'm like, even though he's on the wait list, he's really important that I think we get to him. And so I went for a solid like 1.5, 2% win rate, hopefully for Kassadin here, that I hope is actually going to be pretty solid here. So Kassadin's really, really strong. Ultimately, a couple things that I went for here. So one, in general, there's a couple things I could have gone for here. So I had a version of the change list where I nerfed his AP ratios pretty heavily. And the feedback I got was that people were more offended because there's two thought processes here, right? So there's one where, maybe this is wrong, but it's the avenue I went for first, where like maybe Kassadin shouldn't scale quite as hard as he does, where he just kind of wins the game at level 16. I'm overstating it slightly, but like I think he's even sharper 16 power spike than Kayle. And so there's an avenue where it's like, actually, what if we nerfed Kassadin's top end and it just wasn't quite so strong? Ultimately, we didn't go for it, but I had versions where I nerfed like some AP ratios and stuff and went that way. I like nerfed E's and Q's AP ratios and did some stuff there. Ultimately, though, getting feedback from some of the high school players on the squad. The guy sits across from me is a GM mid laner, for example, and it's like, actually, the thing that's offensive to me is that he just takes Ignite and Electrocute and just trades on you at 6, and Kassadin is meant to be the scaling beast. He just trades on you at 6, and you just kind of get fucking destroyed. And I was like, okay, we can go for an early game nerf instead. Now, no matter what we were doing, I always wanted to nerf Riftlock by 10 flat damage and 5 on the scaling here. Just because I generally dislike when ults don't scale that hard. Like, to be fair, there is a max mana ratio, and because it's max mana, not bonus mana, this scales off character level, so there is functionally some baseline scaling between level 6 and level 16 that happens just because of the max mana ratio, regardless of AP, but even still, just only getting 50% more base damage from level 6 to 16, to me was like, nope, this sets off alarm bells, it's not okay with me, we're going to lower the base damage. Obviously, this ability still needs to function to some degree. I think 70 plus 2% max mana is still more than functional as a button press, especially because the cooldown is like 5 seconds, it's not hard. But I went for some base damage here because I want there to be a more meaningful break on when this ability scales. And just drop Force Pulse early rank damage because, again, 80 to 180 is really, really tightened scaling. Tightened is not a word. It's okay. I want to go for this to actually make ability ranks matter. You still already max Force Pulse first. I'm not trying to change that. That's still true. That's okay. But just, well, it's you're going to feel it 20, 15, 10, 5. Yeah, level 9 is finally maxed out, whatever. But by that point, you've got your 10 damage after Riftwalk. And then another big one is just the cooldown on nearby casts. This was actually someone else's suggestion as well, which was, hey, when we shipped the E change, and instead of making it turn on when there are 6 casts nearby, it's a -2 cooldown per cast nearby, which in really hectic team fights can be a lower cooldown. In a really, really slow ending phase can be a lower cooldown. In other contexts, it could be a higher cooldown, but maybe that lever is still too strong, and so it nerfs it from 1 to 0.75, which I think is going to be pretty reasonable. So let's do the math on what this means. So here is Kassadin's E damage before and after, 20 flat into 5 flat into 0. Pretty simple math here, with some expected ability power on the champion. Here's the damage before and after. Not a scary thing with the math here. This is just the basic E cooldown with 8 casts nearby. If you just cut 8 seconds off the cooldown versus 6 seconds off the cooldown, which is how the math works out, you see the difference in the cooldown here. As a result, 15 to eventually 22%. The more casts you get, like if it's 14 nearby casts, right? This becomes 3. This becomes a much larger number, and it's like double the cooldown instead. So this can really add up and be a pretty big deal. But ultimately, this is a pretty solid change here. Kassadin R damage, again, being down by 10. We can see that because there is a mana ratio. Also, I am including the AP ratio here as well. You can see that from level 6 to level 16, the ability only doubles in damage. That's counting the AP ratio as well, counting him getting mana growth, counting him getting everything else. Now, Kassadin's R damage scaling is a little bit fake in the sense that the context around level 6 and level 16 Riftwalk is very different. Because the cooldown goes from 5 seconds to 2 seconds. That is a very, very different spell when the cooldown gets cut by 60%. He also has a much larger mana pool at level 16 than he is at level 6, where he has a full Roa, a full Ceres. Maybe he chose Frozen Heart for some reason. But like the ability to cast multiple of this ability is also different. So even though the base damage, now finally doubles, even though the total damage finally doubles at level 16, the context around the ability is also, of course, different. Even still, I think it's fine to say, hey, let's have this damage be more impactfully different. Of course, here's the max damage difference here. It's down by 30, because of course that's how the math works here. But overall, Riftwalk does less damage. It's, not super felt late game, right? 3 to 4% less damage off of your ultimate is not a very, very big deal. Of course, your E is not doing any less damage late game either. But the E cooldown is going to be felt. That's a pretty big deal, I think. So this is going to be his biggest felt late game nerf for sure. And this is going to be pretty well felt in the early game. I think this is going to be a less of a big deal in the early game. There's going to be more of a big deal in the early game. And this will be, a moderate deal in the early game here as well. So pretty solid Kassadin nerf, I think. We'll see what it looks like after the patch. But I have a good feeling that Kassadin now is going to be enough nerfs that he's no longer required required ban. And he should still be a decent champion. If he's in the dog pile and he's like 48%, I am willing to be like, oh, I was wrong, and we'll buff him back up to some degree. We'll probably walk back like the nearby cast or something like that, and go from there. We'll see, though. If I go too hard, I'm happy to bring him back to 50%. I think it's fair if this champion is around 50%. 49, maybe at the lowest or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not saying he can't be below 49, but like if this is a 4% win rate nerf, I went too hard, and that's a mistake, and I should not go that hard, right? That's all I'm saying. Kayle is getting buffed. So this was kind of an interesting scenario because Kayle is not horrible, to be clear. She is sub 50% win rate. She's been that way for a while. There's a decent chance that Kayle maybe deserves a high resting win rate. She tends to be not terribly offensive as a champion. Her inevitability is not quite as aggressive as Kassadin's. I think her late game counterplay is better than Kassadin's, where yes, she turns invulnerable, but she has no innate escapes. Like she walks fast for a second and a half. It's not a big deal. You can still stun lock her. You can still flash Mal's ult her. Like there is much more counterplay to Kayle than there is Kassadin, is ultimately what I'm saying here. I think it is okay to accidentally land on a too strong version of Kayle. That said, I'm also not trying to overbuff. So I want to give some context because I saw some comments about how this buff felt very small. I believe this change is a big deal. It's not huge, but I believe this change is actually a pretty big deal. 5% AP on hit. If I had more time for this, I could have buffed the AD ratios in this champion as well and tried to make the AD version of Kayle a bit more interesting. The problem with that, to sit on that world for a second, is I don't know in what ways AD Kayle went to be better than AP Kayle. Like, unless we strip the attack damage ratios off of Q and R, and, AP Kayle has much better spells. AD Kayle just, like, it's a 40% bonus AD ratio on E, and it's like, AD Kayle's a really good auto attacker. But like the problem with AD Kayle's good auto attacker is like we have those champions. They're called marksmen, and so I'm unsure if AD Kayle gets a unique niche. Now maybe it's like, well, actually you see AD Kayle's a spellcaster burst build, and I mean maybe right, but like this is something that I just need more thought for, and is not the kind of scope of changes that makes sense when I'm like, I just want to give Kayle 1% win rate and then move on because I have other stuff to do. Not to like sell Kayle short. I really like playing Kayle. It's one of my favorite champions. Like I want to do right by Kayle. I want to be clear. I'm not like brushing this off. I like after we do the meeting of like which champs we're going to buff, we pick our like 10 champs, whatever, for the patch. Like I chose Kayle and chose Lee Sin because I'm passionate about those champions. The champions that I play a lot of normally and really like them. So like I want to do good changes for Kayle. And be clear about that one. I really like her. Anyway. So let me talk about what was a little bit funky with picking the change list here with Kayle. So August, of course, very passionate Kayle enthusiast. I believe he's the one who shipped Kayle's most recent rework. And I think that was really cool. I think Kayle's great for it. But anyway, the point being, he was like, well, here's what I see on like r/Kayle mains. Here's what players have told me, whatever. The things that they felt bad about losing and want back and whatnot. What's also interesting is then balancing that with like, okay, what's interesting, what's not. So for example, there was a version of the change list where I gave her like, I buffed her MR per level from like 0.75 or whatever to 2. This essentially meant that she would have regular AD carry marksman MR at like level 16. Because her base MR is like 22, and by giving her like roughly melee champion MR growth, she would like reach Jinx MR at 16, which seems reasonable. That said, though, I actually think Kayle just deserves to have low MR because, and this is why I did weird things with like Overheal's shield scaling, and we'll talk about that when we get later on in the patch. Champs that deal 1 million damage late game should still be killable. And so a world where Kayle like, I know it's like giving her normal champion MR, but like she turns self-invulnerable and self-heals and can like build Zhonya's in like her core stat profile. This champ has to die somehow. And so like, oh, you have low MR, and so like Echo can assassinate you is like, to me, actually a reasonable weakness, and just Kayle just uniquely has really low MR. That's okay. She's Kayle. She deals 7 million damage. Like, Kayle can be a balanced, fulfilling, and fair champion with low MR. So ultimately, I was hesitant on that one. There was some pushback on it not being a very exciting team in the first place, and honestly, I'm not convinced Kayle can't just be great with low MR. So cut that one. Passive up 10% is basically just like, hey, More skilled players are better at using move speed. I could probably go up higher. This could, I don't know, maybe it could be 15% even. I'm not sure. This probably went too low. This was August saying like, I'm sad I picked 8% for the move speed. I should just pick like a nice round number like 10. I actually kind of wish I buffed this more. Just like the more I give it thought to him, the more I'm like, I could have spent longer on this change list, and I want to be kind of honest about that. But like, directionally, I think this is a good change. Anyway, I do think 5% AP ratio on every auto attack is a pretty meaningful change as well. That, you know, her core builds are going to have a solid 300-400 ability power on that, and that's a lot of extra damage. And anyway, getting back to how large these buffs are, there was some confusion, and I could have done a better job of actually sort of like overseeing this and policing it. But we have a team that like they're highly skilled players, and like their job is to functionally analyze the game and give us feedback and be like, hey, are our change lists too strong, too weak? For example, they made a shot call on how much like overall game agency AD carries would have as of because of the micropatch changes, and it and they're like, oh, AD carries gonna gain like about 1% of overall game agency. And, you know, when you go from 20% to 21%, that's a pretty big deal. Well, they're going to gain almost 1% of agency. And they were pretty close. It was like a bit more than 1%. Like 80 carries gained even more than they thought. And I was like, this actually, like the more I thought about the changes, I'm like, it actually isn't that much. Like, you know, you can build IE save. Like, that's not that big of a deal. And it's like, oh, okay. It's actually kind of absurd. They're the best class in the game outside of jungle. Okay. So anyway, this is very useful to have them because their shot call is actually pretty good. And so they did like some patch research and was like, oh, actually, Kayle has had changes like this before. We're concerned there's going to be too much power to give for the AP ratio buff and the E rank up and some other stuff. And so I just kind of cut the E rank up off the ability. Ultimately, we'll see. Anyway, yeah. If it's too small, we can always buff Kayle again, but we'll see what happens. I spent a really long time on what's really, really low changes, but ultimately, hopefully this was at least a little bit enlightening in terms of me describing what went on to the patch. But I think this should still be good. It's directionally good, I think, very much for Kayle. And the reason, by the way, I'm saying, like, hey, she's feeling less than angelic, grant some skill expression. Like, the reason I said skill expression, like, half this language is mine, half of it's not, but half the language is mine because move speed is skill expressive, and last hitting minions to gain gold is skill expressive. Kayle has low MMR skew. She's better in like bronze, silver, gold than she is in plat, diamond, than she is in masters, etc. And so things like move speed and things like gold scaling help with MMR skew. So the more we can push Kayle towards, well, your gold income matters and a little bit less so your XP, the more we can say, well, your move speed is high. You can use this in meaningful, compelling ways. Like, that's useful stuff and, you know, a good direction for Kayle. Obviously, she's always going to have the character level scaling fantasy. You can never get rid of that. That's just core to the champion. Character level scaling tends to be low elo skewed, but I think there's ways to dance around that a little bit and get to a decent spot. Next. Oh, sorry, we have math on this, by the way. So here's Kayle's auto tech damage before and after. So if you do a non-death cap AD build, you still do like 5% more damage on hit. And of course, this does not count Nash's Tooth, sure. It does not count the passive waves. Those are there as well. But in terms of how much just auto attack on hit damage do you deal with this champion, it is up, you know, pretty much instantly 1% more damage, but trends toward about 5%, which would be a lot better if you get to death cap. That'll spike your AP a whole bunch higher, and it's gonna be more than that. But this is why it's like, this isn't nothing. This is a meaningful amount of increased damage. Okay, we move on to Kayn, who's getting some buffs specifically aimed at blue Kayn. Ultimately, the damage amp for blue Kayn passive is going from 1340 to 15 to 45%, as well as Ripping Slash is getting a bonus AD ratio. Keep in mind that red Kayn Q is a different spell and does not count any of these scalars, so this is for neutral Kayn and blue Kayn only, and this is for blue Kayn only. So it is, of course, a direct buff to pre-conversion Kayn a little bit, and as soon as you turn red Kayn, this drops to 0. Well, it drops to 100% the same damage. Here is just the amount of damage coming out of the passive. This is not the amount of total damage dealt by the character, but the amount of total damage coming out of the passive is up by about 13%, as well as his Q doing 2 to 10% more damage on Kayn. So pretty solid blue Kayn buffs. Seems pretty reasonable. I think it's you know, pretty solid options picked right there, and on we go. We then have LeBlanc, who is getting some pretty substantial mana regeneration gains. I'm a pretty big fan of mana regen being a low MMR skewed stat. Of course, trying to buff LeBlanc in ways that are not specifically pro-bound, hoping to help mere mortals with LeBlanc. Of course, she's frequently a pro issue, and that can be a problem where you feel like you have very little room to buff her, and it's like, well, we can back him, we can buff her. Oh, she's in pro. All right, well, we have to react a month late, because that's how reacting to pro works. All right, well, was it enough? Nope, she's still in pro. Okay, we gotta go again. And it's just like, that just feels bad for everyone. So always trying to find buffs that help non-expert LeBlancs is definitely helpful. So a bunch of mana regen, some mana cost off of Q, and then early cooldown ranks on Mimic. It should be pretty interesting. So let's talk about what's going on here. Here's LeBlanc's mana regen per minute before and after, up pretty substantially overall. This gives her very, very high mana regen overall. Keep in mind, mages have very high flat mana pools. So in terms of like the total amount of mana available to her over the course of like 4 minutes off of a recall, she's going to have like, 1,300 mana from having Ludens and base stats. And then, still regens 300 mana a minute here. So, an extra roughly 1 mana per second, an extra, 60 or so mana per minute in the late game is something for sure. But keep in mind, again, she's sitting on like 1,300 base mana with her Mythic. And if she goes for Seraphs for some reason, it's another 800 above that. Then we have Q cost, which is going to be better from level 8 and onwards. You'll certainly feel this. It's more mana constraint easing. And then the R cooldown is better from levels 6 through 15. Which should be pretty solid. So, these are a lot of buffs. There's definitely quite a lot of win rate to LeBlanc. She can certainly use it in solo queue. She's not in a strong spot in solo queue. We'll see what it does for pro presence. Of course, it's not more burst damage. It's not really more poke. It is a little bit if you're going to do these combos more often. At level 10, you get 10 seconds off it. At level 13, you get 5 seconds off it. That certainly is going to matter for WQRW, and doing that, a little bit sooner is going to matter for her poke pattern and pro play. The final of the individual champions I picked up as quick response changes is Lee Sin Q. This is unfortunately an incorrect summary sentence. So I want to point out, by the way, that these these context paragraphs are often written by the designers. I wrote pretty much the entire sentence here. This entire paragraph is pretty much what I said. But we don't usually write the summaries. I could from now on and just like have them there. I didn't, to be fair, proofread the summaries. The patch note flow, at least for this one, I verified that the individual changes were in the right ways. I verified that the context sentences were in, and I think for the most part made sense, but I did not see the summaries. I could have done a better job of looking into them. Of course, again, there is a mistake here. The base damage is functionally increased, but we move on. So Lee Sin. For a very, very long time, I've wanted to buff any early game skewed AD champion to give them total AD scaling on their abilities when possible. In order to flatten out their character growth via just straight up character level gives them damage. I just think that's valuable. I think it's really useful. I know, for example, a champion like Mordekaiser has pretty substantial character level scaling on his kit. His Q, part of his base damage is per rank, part of the base damage is per character level. And I think it's actually a decent lever for spreading out damage and letting late games exist on champs who maybe don't have an ability that deals damage on their rank ups, right? So Mordekaiser's last rank is W, which is his shield. And it's like, well, and his R just gets cooldown on rank up. So like for level 13 onwards, you literally don't gain damage except for ability power. And it's like, well, that feels bad. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's what the passive is for. It's got some percent health damage on it. The ES and magic pen percent on it. And the Q has character levels going on. I think it's a useful thing. For smoothing out power curves. I think it's a really good tool to have in these spots here. So I gave Tempest Cripple a total AD ratio, and all I really did here is I functionally dropped the base damage by 65. Lee Sin's base AD is 68. This is a 3 damage increase at rank 1, at level 1, and then from every level onwards, we keep the 30 damage per rank up incentive, and we move on from there. Now, there were a couple of versions of this. There was one where I think I actually gave it, I might have actually given it 5 more damage on rank up. I might have given it 35 on rank up. And, making it a total AD ratio is going to be a pretty big deal. We'll talk about the math in a little bit. But also giving it 5 more damage on rank up, which, by the way, E2 Lee Sin is not close to W2 Lee Sin. And I was like, oh, it might be useful to make E2 Lee Sin at least viable, give players some choice. The difficulty there is I am really afraid, maybe I shouldn't be, but I'm really, really afraid of lane Lee Sin coming back. I think it's generally fairly abusive. This champion not only does not have mana costs, he has no mana cost wave clear. He has inbuilt spell vamp and lifesteal. Like if lane Lee Sin is good, you do not have counterplay. Oh, I have a free self shield, so I can block your poke with my Doran's shield and second wind. And then I press W again, and whatever damage you did deal, I just lifesteal back up by pressing E and Iron Spike Whip, and the minion wave died. See you next time. My resources are still full. Like, that is not a good laning pattern. It's like you either all-in Lee Sin. Oh, by the way, he kicks you out and you die. Or he ward hops out of the lane. You can't all-in him. Like, there is no counterplay to lane Lee Sin. So I'm really afraid of this. And maybe I was a bit too scared. But ultimately, anyway, we kept it with a 30 damage per rank up. We kept the total D ratio. E is obviously just, like, in all contexts, a much stronger ability. Now, I did still find a way to buff putting points into E. If you want to try to max E second, you have a much stronger slow for it. That's kind of cool. But even if you do max E last, well, at level 14, 15, 17, 18, whatever, you've still got a slightly more enticing skill point to give you a little bit more something in the late game. Lee Sin has typically been really, really, really pro-bound. A lot of it's because he is aggressively early game skewed. He certainly gets a lot of mid game out of this. He gets some more late game out of this as well, to be fair, with his AD ratio also buffed. But I'm trying to say, hey, you know, he's obviously still a good, you know, level 3 camp ganker. That's not really going anywhere. And in fact, his level 3 gank is going to be about 10 more damage because, you know, he's going to gain some base AD and that's going to increase E damage, but it's not going to be a huge deal there. But, like, I'm working through all that, right? Where it's like, I'm really afraid of lane Lee Sin. How much power can we give him? I would like to give him power aimed at late game. This actually, the last change I did was this one, which added the Q ratio, where ultimately I said, okay, I'm looking to give him like 1.5% win rate, maybe even 2% win rate, because he's at like 46 something in solo queue. Like he can go really far before he's overpowered in solo queue. So, you know, basically it's like, okay, so the feedback I got, a pushback I got was, we should not buff his E by 1.5% win rate, which, like, you know what? Fair point. If we're going to buff him by 1.5%, 2% win rate, it should be on more than just his E. His E is arguably his most boring skill. I think that's actually true. Lee Sin's most boring ability is his E. Now, I think, again, for functionality, I think this is reasonable to do and to give it some buffs. I'm actually very happy with these changes. I'm glad I did them. But, like, you know, add some other gameplay here, right? The slow and the Q bonus AD ratio. I actually want to point out, by the way, I'm shipping a bug in this patch. Functionality-wise, this is going to be accurate. It's 1.1 bonus AD on first hit and second hit. The tooltip is going to read 1.2 bonus AD on Q2. That is inaccurate. I updated the wrong... So, the unfortunate way that Lee Sin's Q is coded... Q2 is tooltipped as just a tooltip. So, like, Q2's damage is actually references Q1, like the actual like numbers. So, like, if you change how Q1 is coded, that will change how Q2 works. However, because of how our tooltip functionality works, we have to write Q tools. Like, if you hover over Sonic Wave, it'll be like, Sonic Wave does this. When you recast it, it casts Resonating Strike, which does this other thing. That is written as a tooltip description into Sonic Wave. Because, yeah, Sonic Wave is not Resonating Strike. It's written as a tooltip into Sonic Wave. I failed to update that correctly. So Sonic Wave's tooltip for Resonating Strike reads 1.2 bonus AD. Really what happened is I just didn't scroll far enough down the list to change 1.2 to 1.1 in all the right places. Like, the first time I did this change, I made Q 1.2, and I had this buff, and 1.2 bonus AD, and the gameplay team was like, yo, this is way too much power, you should tone it back a little bit, and so I made it 1.1, and I fixed it functionality-wise to 1.1, and the tooltip is appropriate, except here. So again, tooltip only bug, but I shipped the bug in this patch. It's already fixed for 13.4, but hey, by the way, letting you know this happened. All right! Spent a lot of time on that one. So here is Lee Sin's Q damage. Keep in mind that this can deal up to triple damage, so you only see plus 18 damage. This can be plus... like 50, because Q1 deals up to 18 more damage, Q2 deals up to 18 more damage, or up to double, aka 36 more damage. So you can get quite a lot of damage out of this one. So, you know, right, like this is minimum plus 22 damage off of Q at level 13, right? Plus 22 off of Q at level 13. We look over here, and we've got a solid plus 40 damage off of E. Here, it's a pretty substantial buff. This is pretty meaningful. I believe I did the math right. This is just 30 times ability rank. 30 times ability rank plus 70 flat, and this is just simply 30 times ability rank plus 5 flat. Of course, plus the AD ratio, so you get plus 3 damage here. We go to level 13. This is, of course, with some AD items as well, and it's a solid 40 damage. So, yeah, pretty powerful stuff. Definitely a pretty meaningful increase in the damage. Then as you put ranks in, of course, it gets nicer on from there. Here's a slow difference. Oh, I'm still going to assume that you're maxing E last. I don't believe I gave enough incentive to rank this. Keep in mind, E does not have a cooldown incentive, so the base damage going up does not make you want to bump this even more unless you're getting to wave clear breakpoints. Which, maybe it is. Like, maybe it's like, oh, actually, I'm going to play Assassin Lee Sin, and I'm going to max QE, and I'm going to go Eclipse, and I'm going to go Yomu's, and I'm going to go Black Cleaver, and I'm just going to one-shot people. Then maybe we'll max E second, because, of course, his damage is higher, and so your ability to be an Assassin is also higher as well, and it's a possibility here. But we'll see what happens. Those are changes to Lee Sin. All right, great. Let's go to the next one. Trundle. So lost here. I like this one. Trundle's dance speed now scales with Trundle's move speed. Just a cute change. I think it's cute. Good job. Doesn't take very long. I think this took the designer... I know it was under an hour. I forget how many minutes. It was either like 15 or 45. I forget what it was. But it's some number under an hour. Because like, come on, it's fun. So just did it for that. I think it's great. I think it's cool. I'm glad we have the autonomy to do fun things like that. I think it's kind of neat. Either way, Frozen Domain down 2 seconds in the cooldown. When I used to be playing a bit of Trundle last season, data seemed to indicate that actually W-Max might have been the right build for him, because of just how many stats W gives you on rank up. Q is, of course, nice. You get some more AD ratio with it and whatnot, but W-Max just gave you a lot of power, really. And with a flat clone direction here, this actually further incentivized W-Max, where, right, if all your power is in being on top of W, it having a close 100% uptime is a really, really big deal for having that power at all points in time. So there's a real chance here that W-Max Trundle is the thing. Either way, here's the cooldown before and after. It's not exciting math, but there it is, all the same. We get some nerfs to Zac. We had held off on Zac back in the 13.1 micropatch, aka 13.2, because we were nerfing Demonic Embrace, and he wasn't honestly that far over the line. Certainly he was winning in a lot of these roles, but like he wasn't a 55% winner champion in all these roles. He was just strong in all these roles. And so he got, he didn't get pulled in for that patch, but he just pulled in for this one. Even though I am making changes to Radiant Virtue in this patch, I think it's still pretty reasonable that he's getting nerfed. And it's largely nerfs to his AP focused builds. It's still going to be very good, I'm pretty sure, but overall nerfs to the champion. AP ratio, straight nerf to less slingshot, plus 5 damage off the rank up. It'll matter. Getting his health damage AP ratio dropped a bit as well. Let's talk about Zac. We're going to go E damage first. Hang on. No. Okay. Sorry. This is W damage, then E damage. Let's make sure we're doing this correctly. So E is easier to math out, so I'll just kind of compare this one real quick. Right. A flat 0 to 20 off the damage output. You max it first. So here's the biggest, kind of the biggest break. Wait, am I trolling? I might be trolling. Hang on. Oh, yeah, I did it wrong. Okay, hold on. It's going to be 15 plus 45. There we go. I didn't, in fact, do it wrong. There we go. Here's the actual E damage here. So, of course, not a very big deal. Of course, you don't even learn at level 1. You're going to learn around here or something. But, you get to level 9. It's like, actually, yeah, pretty meaningful drop-off in how much burst damage it deals. Keep in mind that 0.1 off the AP ratio. I want to point out this is still actually a very aggressive AP ratio. This is still 300 ability power, doubles the damage of the ability. This is what I think is, and this actually, when we get into my take support changes, this is kind of the number I'm working off of, which is if you want to give a champion an aggressive AP ratio, like if they're meant to be at least somewhat a damaged champion, and you want AP to be a reasonably viable build, a decent rule of thumb, in my opinion, is 300 ability power to double the max rank damage of the ability. And that's about how aggressive you need to be, I think, to bribe someone into building that stat. Now, sometimes you have to go much more extreme. For example, Singed has a way more aggressive AP ratio than 300. It's like 200 to double the damage. It's like really, really aggressive. But like he also needs it because otherwise he's just going to build full tank. And allowing him to build ability power is a cool thing. And, keeping those builds in balance is like, you need to kind of pay attention to what those AP ratios are, right? So this puts it within still a very reasonable realm of dealing meaningful damage. Just kind of want to keep that out there in mind because I think that's actually pretty worth thinking about. And then unstable matter, of course, 4% 100 ability power is 3% 100 ability power. So we can, again, use the math here. It's like 300 AP is 9% max health damage. yeah, that's you know, somewhere in the realm of doubling the damage of the ability. Keep in mind that 8% of what 1,000 is like if they have 1,000 max HP, which is like not a lot of max HP. That's 80 damage, right? So if they have 2,000 health, which is a more reasonable champion, that's 160 damage, right? Okay, so the base damage here is going to kind of squashed. So this means that this is now a reasonable, normal-ish 300 AP, roughly doubles the damage of this ability, because this is, you know, yeah, that's about how the number's going to line up, right? So is that going from over-aggressive AP ratios to reasonably aggressive AP ratios, which, yeah, if you're going to build a riskier Zac build and go for ability power, this is kind of where the numbers should live. So numbers are going somewhere realistic, right? Anyway, here is the unstable matter damage as a result. Doing all the math here, and yeah, as time goes on, yes, really, W. I'm using Cassante as my example target, where if I have 3 ability power items and 100, I'm at like 180 or I'm at 279. I'm at 280 ability power here. We're at like 3 items, and they all have AP on them. Yeah, this thing does 500 something damage, right? It's a really high damage ability for them that has like, you know, 2-second cooldown that resets them picking up blobs. Now, of course, I'm against a Cassante, but this is, you know, a no item Cassante, just 2,500 HP, which is, you know, only moderate, I would say, for a melee champion. So pretty big drop, right? Just for the AP ratio nerf. Just for the AP ratio nerf, we get 12% off the damage if you're building a ton of AP. Of course, if you're getting fewer items, right? Like if we take this data table and we say, actually, our bonus AP, we're gonna stop and we're just gonna keep it at like, you know, we're just gonna get like demonic embrace health, you know, at best. We're gonna do something like this, and we get to like 170 maybe. Oh, you know, it's a little bit less aggressive. Make sure we actually look at the right table. Yeah, because then we're okay. Anyway. Yeah, right. 587, 501, and yeah, there we go. Okay. So, yep. That's how much it nerfs it. Move on. We now go into items. I'm going to take some time here to talk about overall what's happening with Radiant Virtue right now. I made a video about this a week and a half ago where I was talking about my plans with the item, what we were doing with it, or whenever that video actually came out. Maybe it was last Friday. Maybe it was something. I don't remember exactly. Who cares? But I want to talk about Radiant Virtue overall. Okay. So this item currently is overpowered. It is. It is an overpowered item, and it is, I mean, correctly because it's OP, but not correct for the goal of the item, being poached a lot by enchanters. Radiant Virtue should not be a Karma item. Karma has items. She has Shirelia's, she has Mandate, she has Moonstorm Renewer, she can build ability power theoretically. Like, she has items already, and she can even go lock it, and that's fine too. Radiant Virtue is meant to be an option right now. This is where it's placed. It's meant to be the 4th big tank mythic, where I'm Shen, or I'm Ornn and I'm team fighting, or I'm Zac and I'm team fighting, and I want a team fight, help my team, income tank item. Now that is a relatively small niche, to be fair. But that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be like, hey, team, gather around, let's fight together. It's meant to be a team-centric tank item. And so it has to have some kind of diffused aura-esque output, right? Okay, great. What I did in this patch was relatively low-scope work. And it was trying to get it a bit out of the hands of Karma and a bit more into the hands of champions like Shen. Now, a few things going on here. Number one, I want to make the item more exciting to consider buying, right? I want people to like buying this, not just because it's OP, but because it actually does cool things for them. That's kind of the hope, right? Now, again, this is very low scope work, so we can only go so far with the low scope work, but that's kind of the goal. Number two, I do want to lower the poaching. I want to make its outputs more tied to these income tanks, and less tied to, well, Karma pressed R plus E, so she got the benefit. And so it's kind of narrowing in what it does to make those numbers look more exciting and hopefully make that look cooler and not just be like, well, I can trigger this on cooldown to heal my team, so it's the best item for me. And so via that, you no longer give a 20 ability haste. Well, technically it's non-ultimate ability haste aura. That's gone. I ripped that out of the item because it's incredibly, incredibly hard to appreciate. Now, the goal was to give some benefit other than just I heal people. Like, I get, like, the initial designer who worked on this, you know, wanted to give some cool aura effect that was interesting, that was maybe noticeable, that was, you know, a bit unique. And it certainly is, but unfortunately, it is really, really hard to notice that you're giving your teammates ability haste. I'm pretty sure this is a very, very large nerf. I think this is a lot of the power of the item, and no one knows. And I think that is ultimately the gravest sin you can do, it's not actually the gravest sin. I think you want as much satisfaction per power as possible. That is always the goal. You want as much satisfaction per power as possible. I'm going to call out Yasuo as an example. Yasuo is an incredibly satisfying champion to play. He's not actually all that powerful. His win rate is very normal. And yet, people really, really like picking Yasuo. He is satisfying to play. And I'm not saying he is the pinnacle of champion design, but he is a really satisfying champion to play, and he's not actually overpowered. He's cool. By comparison, we have, I don't know, champions like Rel, who are, at least statistically, more powerful than Yasuo, and yet Rel players say, my champ isn't viable, I can't pick her. It's like, she's like a top 5 win rate support actively in current League of Legends. But if she doesn't feel satisfying, if she doesn't feel like she's powerful, well, she is and doesn't feel that way. Ooh, that's a problem, right? This is not to rag on Rel. She's a pretty cool champion. I'm just not much of a support tank player, so I don't have a lot of experience with her. But anyway, I am trying to get Radiant Virtue into a spot where its strengths are appreciable. For context, right now, what I've been working on this week is pitching up new versions of Radiant Virtue. I know in the last video, someone go, oh, I can make it an active. If its current output is I heal people around me, that is a really, really bad active item. Because I'm just going to press it on cooldown to heal my team up. This item just instantly fails if it's an active. So it's keeping its ult, it's keeping this shape. It might have to get nerfed. This item might still be OP, but this item is keeping this shape until I can come up with a pitch that is good enough that we're going to invest in it and make a new item. Otherwise, this item is going to sit like this outside of balance changes for a while, as far as I'm concerned. But so the goal, outside of larger scope work, which again I'm working on, is how can I make this item feel more satisfying, but actually make it less powerful? And I think that's actually going to be the case here. So total cost is going up. This is actually the last change I shipped for this item, which is increasing the cost because I wasn't convinced to actually nerf the item enough. Cooldown going up to 90 is very reasonable. I played tested this item on Zac last week, and this isn't a nerf because the base cooldown of Zac Ultimate is like 2 minutes. So even though this item has 20 ability haste on it, you still can't get below this until you also get boots 2, and you kind of go on from there. So it takes a bit for this to even be a nerf. Now, this, of course, can get annoying to the point where, oh, it's not up for every ultimate. Well, we have a rune for that. It's called Ingenious Hunter. You're welcome to get it. Realistically, that's fine. You can just do that instead. I'm pretty sure Ingenious Hunter works on Radiant Virtue. To be fair, I did not test that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it works. Apologies if I'm wrong about this one. But again, we have a rune system, and it can cover for this, right? So this is specifically a Karma nerf. But it's also just again, it's not really a nerf for a lot of champions. Max health to you goes from 10 to 15%. That's, of course, a very big buff to your durability. But I also want to point out that the healing that comes out of this item is based on your max health. So if you had 1,000 HP, it would heal based on having 1,100 HP. Now it heals based on having 1,150 HP, which means the healing is higher. The healing amp passive on being lower health has been removed. So instead of healing for 8 to 60% max health over 9 seconds based on how injured people were, it's just a flat 12% max health over 9 seconds instead. I didn't end up changing the tick rate on this. I didn't end up changing the numbers a lot. But instead of being 4 ticks of 2%, it's 4 ticks of 3%. And that's how the item goes. It also means, by the way, that on activation, instead of giving you 10 plus 2 is 12% max HP, it's giving you 15 plus 3 is 18% max HP. So a pretty substantial increase there as well. So let's talk about the math in Bexley now with Radiant Virtue. Okay, again, this item is 200 gold more expensive and no longer has the ability haste aura on it. Based on your max health before activating, how much total health did Radiant Virtue give you before and after? Now, for context, I am picking a midpoint here where if I'm at half HP, I'm getting about 12% max health over this passive. If I'm at half. Now, if I'm at above half, the old item is even worse. If I'm below half, the old item is even better. But I chose half because it's a midpoint and it's fine. So for me, this item provides 24% more health via the activation. If I'm really, really big, if I'm like almost full build Mundo, 3.5k health pre-activation, this item gave me 800 health and now gives me 1,000 health. It gives me 200 more health to me, Dr. Mundo. That's pretty good, right? Now, I don't get ability haste during it. That matters. I don't get my teammates ability haste during it. That matters. This item's 200 gold more expensive. That also matters. 200 gold is 75 health, right? It's half Ruby Crystal, so you can see the breakpoint right here is already that. But what it gives my teammates is 5% more health, right? And so I don't give my teammates as much ability haste. I don't give myself as much ability haste. I heal my teammates a little bit more, right? But like I heal them 5% more. Now again, it's on average. If they were like at 80% health, this is actually bigger than that, right? Because they were getting, you know, a 9% heal over time, and now they're getting 12. They're getting like 1/3 more. But like, you know, it's not huge, right? It's basically the difference is that my max health is higher via this line, so the heal is higher as a result. But I think honestly, this is going to read as like, oh, I gain way more max health. The heal is more consistent and arguably just like consistently more strong, consistently stronger. But yeah, the haste aura is gone, and the cost is a bit higher, and the cooldown is like less karma bound. This item I think is still very strong. And I don't think I buffed the item because I really think the haste aura is good. But we'll see what happens. I think it's still a strong item. I think it's actually still an exciting item because a lot of health on you. It's a lot of health on you, and it still gives meaningful healing to your teammates. I think this is still a cool shape for the item. I am happy with where this thing ended up in this patch. And I mean, we'll see what data says afterwards. It's still going to be very, very good. We'll see what happens though, and we'll see what happens, and we'll see if I can come up with a good pitch for a rework onto the item over time. Umbral Glaive is getting some changes. 10-second increase on the cooldown, and ranged champions now only do 2 damage to wards, which means they only 2-hit green wards and trinket wards now. They will still 2-hit pink wards, as will melee champions, but a little bit less. Now, what's interesting though as well is it's actually, in really coordinated scenarios, it's actually a buff because, in some contexts, Ashe can now attack a ward once, and then her teammate can go last hit the ward and share gold with it. It's a very, very minor thing. I don't think it's going to be ultra worth optimizing around, but good to see a cooldown change. Good to see a small nerf to just how fast these things drop wards out, while still keeping it good for melee. Also, no longer instantly kills traps, so a pretty big benefit there as well to not just be a hate draft item against Shaco and team and whatnot. I think those champs are, they're allowed to have their traps be good. So good nerf to Umbral Glaive. Good job to the designer there. I think there's actually very, very good changes to the item overall. Next is one more of my changes. It was meant to ship in 13.2, but because we had to do micropatch, we held the change back. Overheal is stronger for basically everyone. Not tanks, but everyone else is basically better. And especially it's stronger for marksman. The rune is weak. No one really runs it. And the goal here was, again, to give marksman opt-in durability changes. Now, I'm not convinced marksmen need the rune, to be clear. I think the role is plenty powerful. People have been saying they've been really liking the changes. I'm very happy about that. Right now, though, I'm pretty convinced the role is overpowered. Certainly the metagame is entirely about bot lane right now. Every jungler should path bot. Every jungler should just gank off of 3 camps. It's really the optimal way to play the game. It's just turbo gank bot lane, crush bot lane, make that lane win, go snowball turret plates, go snowball dragons, go snowball treasure hunter gold, and then win the game because you've got twice as many treasure hunter stacks you can get there, right? Twice as many champions to get triumph gold off of. Honestly, just like it's the right way to play the game right now. So bot lane is kind of the center of attention. Even if this game weren't, like, even if AD carry wasn't overpowered, it's still the 2 people in that lane. It's still a more volatile lane because you've got crowd control somewhere. You've got more champs to tank tower aggro for turret dives. Like, there's more champs to kill. There's just enough there where it's like, yeah, these champs are immobile, they're squishy, like all these things. It's hard to break away from bot lane Fiesta being the way to play the game, no matter the role of actual AD carry. It's just where all the gold is. So that's a tough one to solve. I don't know how it's going to be solved, but like I think that's a tough one, but still relevant. Either way, going back to it, AD carry is, I think, an overpowered role. That is my belief of the role. I don't think they need more tools. However, I do like giving them frustration levers. Overheal will maybe be competitive with current things like Triumph, like Friends of Mine. It would be actually interesting. And actually, the funny thing is I now kind of wish I picked different numbers for Overheal. Because now I kind of want AD carries to have the chance at having a big enough shield to knock it all in. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Okay, well, let's stop that one. I need to get one more thought. it's a consideration though about like, you know, how much bot lane diving is going on. It's a bit scary. There are some changes going on with that that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But anyway, this is happening. So what's the math on Overheal? So here is Ashe as a basic champion, not running like a health stat shard or anything. And by level 5, it doesn't need a buff. On Overheal, I want to point out, it scales by 20 per level until level 14. Then it scales by 5 per level because I, again, am not trying to give AD carries really substantial, or anyone really substantial level 18 durability. Like, I want to get the shield to a point where it's going to feel good and block damage. And, like, I want to get to that number, right? I want to get to 150, 200. Then at a certain point, you've done your job. Like, in my opinion, runes, on average, that's a very basic rule of thumb, not always true, but in my opinion, on average, runes should be kind of early game skewed. But they should kind of tend to fall off in importance over time. That is my generic belief. Again, very broad strokes here, but it's like, yeah, at level 2, when I have like distortion forward, auto attack Q, auto attack distortion back, I'm doing an electrocute trading pattern. At level 18, I've got 800 ability power and a bunch of other shit going on and like active items. Electrocute's gonna happen. It'll be part of my burst, but like, right? Like, maybe it's allowed to scale, so it, like, I don't have to ignore it, but like, electrocute is how you trade in early laning as LeBlanc. It is not how you trade in late game. This is actually what allows runes like Phase Rush, by the way, to be probably pretty overpowered, because Phase Rush doesn't fall off compared to things like Press the Attack. Or and things like that. I mean, these are another one, right? Where it's like, oh, turns out actually raw attack speed is just really good at all points in time, and that rune also keeps up forever. So again, not all runes actually fall off. Maybe not all runes are supposed to fall off, but in general, vague thoughts there, right? Anyway, again, here is the shielding amount on Ashe v Overheal, and again, it is really substantially up. Really substantially up in the mid game. This is the goal, right? This is what I wanted. I saw the data, I'm like, yep, this is what I want. It's not going to make you invincible at level 1. You're not going to take like a level 1 Yuumi heal and suddenly, you know, you're invincible. It's just like, okay, we got in a mid game. We got to the point where I'm going to start getting dove by the people. I got my Vamp Scepter on my recall. We can start overhealing. We got a couple stacks of Legend Bloodline. We maybe helped kill the first dragon. Okay, we can start healing ourselves, and congratulations, you have a meaningful shield here. And the hope is that you can feel you can run this rune. That's the hope, right? Is that you can feel like you are allowed to run this rune and be less diveable. You are giving up Triumph to do it. You're giving up Presence of Mind to do it. And you have to be able to actually go into lifesteal to do it. So there are some costs here. You have to build around it and whatnot. But if you want to do those things, you have a very strong tool for not being a squishy. And that is why I buffed this rune. It was one of the very first things I actually did when I joined the company, or I joined the design team, I should say, was go for this because it wasn't a good rune. No one uses it. And I am a really big fan of this choice structure of an outlet for a weakness. By giving up something else that's also good. Now, comparing it to someone who maybe gets a bit of bonus health, like Aurelia, it takes a bit longer to catch up, right? As Aurelia, you know, she builds Kindle Gem in her early build path and finishes a Divine Sunderer or whatever. I don't know, like her core build is often things like Blade of the Rune King, Wit's End, whatever, and shield build like doesn't necessarily always get a lot of health early on. But over time, if she scales to eventually 800 bonus HP, which is like 2 items total, it's like I eventually built Sterix and, I don't know, Thornmail. Like, she's going to find 2 health items somewhere in that build. Black Cleaver, something. I don't know. She's going to find something. And it doesn't have to be really. Like, you could just pretend this is Darius. Who cares? Like, generic fighter, they get some bonus health, and yeah, technically, when we stop scaling the rune quite as hard, it's not quite as good there. So Overheal is not, I don't know, in the best spot for these fighters, but like, they also just go Blade the Rune King a lot, and by the time you finish Blade the Rune King around level 9, Overheal is still better, but you're probably not going to take it over Triumph. Now, realistically, this rune could be reshaped, and it should have its percent health ratio back. And some other kind of small scaling of some kind. And actually, it turns out that, you know, balancing it to be good on fighters as well is worthwhile. But I also don't know how fighters are going to ever get off Triumph, so whatever. Right now, Overheal is very much bound to AD carries and champions like Vladimir who are going to self-heal. Again, it's meant to be an AD carry buff. I wasn't trying to buff fighters. I don't think we're even close to fighters picking up this rune, to be honest. It would need to be substantially stronger. I'm not sure it'd be good for the game if they did it. So, whatever, it's fine. But maybe we'll see. I don't know. Right, Mastery can do this. Mastery's not going to get a bonus health. Mastery's going to be in kind of this kind of world. And yeah, I can see a world where Overheal Mastery, right, Blade of the Rune King, and he's got a shield to be a little tanky on the front line. Yasuo could do this. Yasuo doesn't build a lot of bonus HP in his build either. Yasuo could do this. Thoughts? There you go. That's the rune. Okay, so I also changed, I believe, 6 support melee champions in order to hopefully shake up the pro play meta. The solo queue meta is mostly fine. It's pseudo and range supports. The aggregate win rate for melee versus range supports is really close. It's like within 0.5% win rate of the average melee win rate and the average support win rate, like multiplied out even against pick rate. Just like, it's actually pretty fair overall. But the pro meta is really, really skewed. When I look at this, I looked up like total pick rate information in pro play, and it was 20-1 range to melee. It's like exactly Nautilus and like 2 Braum games, you know, holding down the fort. And it's like a really, really heavy like range type metagame. Now, again, this was of like a week ago or so, but the pro meta is really, really, really ranged heavy. And I want there to be diversity. I don't want a pure Nautilus Leona meta. I want there to be some tension around blind pick. Ashe gets countered by Nautilus, gets countered by Braum, gets countered by Karma, gets countered by Lulu, gets countered by Thresh. Like, I want that, right? That's interesting. That keeps the meta flowing. If I don't, to be clear, I don't want bot lane support to be rock, paper, scissors, but counters literally exist. They are unavoidable because kits interact and game time flows interact and strength weaknesses interact. If the pro meta doesn't evolve and instead like degenerates to getting more and more abstract, that means the counters aren't good enough. Because in a world where you're playing Ashe Vera's bot lane, that shit better die to Thresh, Pyke, or Nautilus, or something is wrong. And the fact that that's not happening means either pros are dumb, which some of that can be true, but it also can lead to across the world, no one thinks you can do this. Maybe something wrong with the game. So I took a pretty wide brush here. So I looked at a bunch of pro champions. I actually wrote down literally every single melee champion that had at least 1% pick rate in solo queue. So like, I'm not looking at set support. Like, I know he's out there. Singe support, I know he's out there. I'm not focusing on those, okay? I'm saying, look, if you're remotely in the meta, I will look at you and assess where you're at. And so I wrote down, like, what's your baseline durability? What's your baseline regen? What's your all-in combo potential? Like, how much damage you actually deal? By comparison, how durable are these range supports? Like, how tanky is Lulu? How tanky is Karma? How tanky is Nami? How tanky are these champions? And then sort of just then thought about, okay, so what is going on in these lanes, ultimately? And I came up with a variety of tactics. So here's the weird thing, right? So the reason the durability update happened back in 12.10 was that damage had crept up in the game overall, and champions were kind of just dying in mid game out of nowhere, and I think a lot of this is like laning tank and fighter kits, even if they weren't building damage items, were just doing a bit too much damage. Also, certainly offensive itemization has gotten much more efficient over time. Especially for fighters, this is probably okay, where it's like, yeah, Black Cleaver and Chempunk Chainsword and Death's Dance and Wit's End and all these items are way better than they were in like 2012. Like, if you look at 2012 Renekton builds, it was like Brutalizer and a Sunfire Cape full tank. And it's like, yeah, of course he can't kill anyone. He doesn't have any damage items. And certainly I think items like Prowler's Claw are, I think, bad for the game. I think giving champions target access who don't normally have target access is going to break a lot of patterns and make the game feel bad. Like, there are some axes that kind of aren't allowed to exist. At least that's my sort of belief on it. Again, pretty broad stroke stuff here. Now, I think some items actually work reasonably well. Like, I actually think Gale Force is actually pretty solid, because Gale Force makes you pay a really high cost. In that, like, if you want to dash out as an AD carry, well, congratulations, it has less attack damage and less attack speed and less on hit damage than Kraken Slayer. And by the way, your class is about consistent damage, so that really matters. Oh, you're picking Gale Force to dash in as a squishy champion to burst? That's interesting. Like, Gale Force, I think, works. I think Gale Force is the one good dash item in League of Legends. That's just my personal opinion. It's not going to be true for everyone. That is sort of my view of it. Whereas I think Prowler's Claw and Rocket Belt I think actually breaks a lot of things where these champs are already melee champions. They already want to be in melee. You're just making their kits easier. And it's like, oh, Diana can Rocket Belt ER me from 2,000 range away. Huh, counterplay. Rek'Sai can Prowler's Claw unburrow me no matter what I do. Like, the entire point of Rek'Sai E is that as a targeted tunnel, that must go the full distance. And you, like, see her go down and do the thing, and you're like, oh, I'm going to run away from the tunnel now, and if she wants to flash, that's got a 5-minute cooldown. Nope, Prowler's Claw, fuck you, I pressed E in your general direction, you died. And it's like, oh, yeah, so the kits just don't have counterplay anymore. These champs just do their thing. So that is, I got really off topic about items and dashes. But anyways, going back to, let's talk about items getting more efficient. Wow, that was really a tangent. What are these champions meant to be allowed to do? What is appropriate and fair gameplay for these champions? How much damage should they have? How much self-sustain should they have? And so I took a pretty big variety of avenues, right? So for example, Alistar didn't get any damage here. Alistar is a champion who has self-healing and teammate healing. And so I have 8 lines of text for Alistar here, okay? Now, only 5 of them actually matter for, like, a tank support update, okay? So Alistar's self-heal now scales at max health, and his ally heal all scales at max health, and is still larger than his teammate, than his self-heal, but not quite as large. Okay, let's start with the heal. Okay, this is Alistar with an approximation, right? So this is flat up how much shield he had for himself, and how much heal he had for his teammate. These are just like straight up, these are the numbers, there was no changing them. This is, we're going to double check what math we're looking at here. Yep, we're looking at an approximation of how much bonus HP Alistar is going to buy over the course of the game, and he's going to self-heal for about 50% more every time this pops. And this is going to be roughly once a wave, by the way. It takes 7 stacks for the heal to pop. You get a stack on nearby minion death, and you get a stack when you CC the enemy champion. So if I, like, headbutt on average once per wave, I'm getting this heal once per wave. So I'm getting 38 health every 30 seconds, aka I'm getting about 1 health per second, which is an increase of about 15, aka 0.5 health per second, which is a pretty solid 2.5 HP 5, not bad. And again, the numbers kind of stick around here. You can see this is like, plus 20, a little bit higher, whatever. My teammate healing is down very little bit. You can see overall, right, plus, right, we're getting plus 19 here, we're getting minus 18 here. The overall lane healing is not very different. I actually don't think Alistar should be the champion you pick to, I mean, he's still very good at it, right? But the overall ally healing of Alistar seemed a bit too high. Alistar himself is the one who is actually taking the punishment and is walking up to last hit and has to navigate trying to get headbutt pulverizes off and has to, like, be a functional champion. And it's like, no. You need to be able to withstand this stuff. Like, you're Ezreal or Ashe or Caitlyn or whatever. Like, they can handle their stuff. Like, you already heal them plenty. They're going to be fine. I want to make sure that you're okay. And so he's going to self-sustain. And in general, Alistar's going to be taking more of this damage anyway. He's going to be better at self-sustaining in the lane. So he's going to be overall another spot so that he can look for the all-in. See, I didn't give Alistar more damage. I gave Alistar more chances to find the all-in. He doesn't get whittled down nearly as hard by getting another, 30-ish health per minute, which is pretty valuable. I lowered the mana costs of every single ability to just be a 50 to 70, no matter what, every single ability is 50 to 70, which means it's 5 off of Q, it's 15 off of W, and it's 0 to 20 off of E. Now, E is your last max. It still will be. The damage rank is really poor. So let's talk about the cooldowns. The mana costs. We're going to scroll down to the mana costs right here. So the total mana cost of a full combo goes from 170 to 150. Now, Alistar is like 320-ish base mana. Like, it still costs him half his mana to do a full combo at level 3, level 4, basically. Like, that's what this costs, is 175, and it's now 155. So, 20 mana off this, pretty valuable stuff here. But, like, he only gets a few chances at it, and I felt a little bit too restrictive. If we're not going to let a tank support instantly kill you on an all-in, which is really fickle, really volatile, and maybe not an acceptable gameplay experience, then give him the chance to try again. Where, okay, he got you to half HP. Cool, he has 20 more mana, and like 100 more HP. So the second try can actually be successful. Here's the 100 more HP thing. Like, that's the goal there, right? Now, while I was here, because I'm allowed to do it, I buffed the AP ratios, and you'll notice that my goal of 300 AP to double is right here. 300 AP is 210, we're roughly doubling. 300 AP, 270, roughly doubling. 300 AP is 210, roughly doubling. And it's like, yeah, give these abilities like actual ability power ratios, because these champions might build Shurelya's, they might get ahead and build Demonic Embrace. There just is ability power in the game. Oh, demonic, or not demonic, sorry, Baron buff, Infernal Drake, things like that, right? Runes even, where you get Relic Shield that has AP on it, stuff like that. Like, these champions have ability power. Like, it's actually forced upon them in their itemization half the time. Like, they deserve to not have troll-ass AP ratios. Yes, these are aggressive ratios, right? They are Zac tier AP ratios. There is a chance we see AP Alistar come out with a 0.2 buff here, a 0.2 buff here, and a 0.3 buff here. This is a really substantial increase. But, his Headbutt Pulve combo is a 1.6 ability power ratio. That's not even that absurd. Like, it's high, but, like, it's not ridiculous. 1.6 is reasonable for an all-in combo. And it's also worth noting that, by the way, his minion clear tools have lower damage than his single target damage tools, right? He can't just Q and one-shot the wave. He can't just E and one-shot the wave. The damages aren't actually that high. So overall, I'm reasonably comfortable with this. I looked up some solo Q win rate stuff for Alistar. It's obviously really, really rare in solo lanes, but yeah, we're not really close to AP Alistar of the game. And maybe it's going to be a bit too good. Maybe it has to be nerfed afterwards. But, like, while I'm here, like, this is a little bit of damage. Like, and it's not none, right? Keep in mind that, he's going to have 15 ability power level 1 if he's running a stat shard and a relic shield. And, well, that's 3 damage. That's 3 damage. And that's 4.5 damage, right? Like, it still is 10 damage of the combo. It's not a large amount of damage to the combo, but it has damage to the combo. And, like, that exists. It just strictly exists. So it's there. And by the way, if you are building AP Alistar, which is here's AP Alistar if you're going to scale up to about 280 ability power. Sorry, right here, 280 ability power. Then, Q does 16% more damage, W does 12% more damage. E, counting the auto attack, does 15% more damage. So, right, like, every single ability on Alistar is doing 50% more damage if you're AP Alistar. That is obviously a really, really big buff, plus the mana cost, plus everything else, plus self-sustain. Like, all these things do buff top lane AP Alistar. And this might have to be 4 and 6%, or 3 and 7% or something next patch, right? Like, this might actually just be bonkers, and I screwed up, and it's not okay. We'll see what happens. I am buffing Braum. Now, I don't expect Braum to be a good outlet for a ranged, like, heavy metagame, but I'm okay with softening Braum somewhat across ranged and melee metagames. Q cooldown is the primary lever here. There were other options I had with Braum. My first change list had passive damage up and passive damage on auto attack up. Like, by the way, if you pop Braum passive on someone, he can punch them and he deals like 1/4 of the pop damage as like bonus damage on hit. That's really, really, really melee skewed. And so I was giving that feedback and I was like, oh, you're right. That's really melee skewed. Let's give him other tools instead. So Q cooldown, right, is an anti-range tool. Now the cost is really low. I think it's like 45. So I'm actually pretty confident that Braum can safely try to spam Q in lane and find an opening. And if he does, cool, we can move on, right? You could like try to play a little bit aggressively, give a little bit of outlet. Like, I don't expect Braum to beat Lulu in lane. He's not gonna, but he has a little bit more agency to fight back and try and do a little bit of something. It's a little. He's also gonna help with his teammates withstand a bit more. He's gonna give another 10 straight up armored MR to teammates. It's actually worth noting that WMAX second, EMAX second are actually relatively close in win rate. It's limited data, but it's actually not that far behind. So there was a chance that like getting an extra 5 points per rank instead of 4 points per rank on W helps that ever so slightly. It's also just a clean numbers thing where 20 to 40 just like looks a lot nicer. But the flat bonus armor MR given to both himself and his target, by the way. So his target's going to also get 20 armor and MR instead of 10. That's going to be pretty meaningful, but also just makes pressing the ability feel a lot better. I think it's actually great. There's another version of the change list where I gave him base health and base health regen, and it was sort of shot down or at least fought against because it's a really boring buff to give a champion. And so this is a more exciting buff, right? And you would agree, like, hey, if I gave him 30 base health and 1.5 base health regen, would you be excited versus this? And so the feedback was correct that, like, this is the better buff, right? So I was given feedback, and we shipped a better buff for Braum, and that's great. And he gets a cooler ability out of W. This is just, I think, a really good thing to do. I will fully take credit for this change. This is actually really, I think it's very smart. I think it's very, very wise that breakpointed per level scaling comes in at really obvious levels. 1.7.13 is a really old holdover because it's 6 levels, and 6 levels, right? 1 through 6, 7 through 12, 13 through 18. Like, I get that. That's clean in a sense. But keying it on functionally ult rank, whether you rank it or not, who cares? Doesn't matter. But keying it off of ult rank is like, oh, I hit 6. I power spiked. Yes, you did. You got your R, and you got your faster tick back on your passive, which is a good thing. It's not going to matter a ton. We can go ahead and look at some of the numbers here. So Braum's passive cooldown is better at level 6, 11, and 12. This is a very, very, very small buff. But again, I think it's design-wise much better for the game to know when your power spikes are. So I'm happy I did that. Here's the Q cooldown. You max it first. It is a bit better in the early game, and then by level 9 it's not any better. But that's fine. You hopefully get some purchase in the early game by doing this. Here is how much total armor Braum will have after casting W before and after the changes, and then functionally how durable he is against that damage type afterwards. And as we can see, right, it kind of goes back up at 14, 15, 17, 18 as we get an extra +1 per rank. His total armor, if he was to learn W at level 1, instead of being 61, it's 74, which is 8.5% more damage taken before dying. It's actually pretty meaningful, right? He has 7% more health during the W. Or against MR, which is even more impressive because MR is lower than his armor, it's like 9% more durability. It's a pretty big deal. Now, the duration is not super duper long, sure, but like it even holds up pretty well because keep in mind, it holds up pretty well. I'm very pleased with this change. I think it's going to be cool. It's at least exciting up. And again, this is basically another example of, look, these melee champs, they're going to get poked on. So we either give them more straight up all-in damage, where just your damage is higher, you're going to kill them more quickly, or you have tools for withstanding it. You can either fight back a bit better, you can soak up the damage a bit better, you have a bit more agency defensively, and it's like, yeah, we're going to get traded on. It's the level 2 freaking, it's the level 1 Halo Blades trade. All right, well, I got to try for my second Q poke 2 seconds sooner. All right, that matters, right? We try Q at level 1, didn't get it, but get off the wave. We can go fight again 2 seconds sooner. Okay, it's rough. It's the level 3 trade. I've learned all my skills. Bam, we get 10 more armor and MR. What that means, that we all take about 8 to 9% more damage to kill during this all-in. So we're gonna survive the double Halo Blades Ashe Caitlyn. We're gonna survive the Lulu Q auto E, like all that stuff. That's gonna matter, right? So a bit more resilient, a bit more unkillable, and I mean, as is his goal. He is a Warden. His tools are basically more defensive. Next up, we have Nautilus, who is getting 6 flat damage on the passive. I chose to give him some damage. I just thought that 8 just felt like too low of a number, so it gets to be a 2-digit number. I just chose kind of 6 somewhat at random. Doesn't really matter what number actually is. I believe the per rank on this ability is actually 6 in the first place, the per level. So it functions like you're 1 level higher, functionally as Nautilus. But just a bit more damage here because I just feel like he could get it. It wasn't a big problem here. The really big one, well, I don't know if it's a really big one, but the one that I think is somewhat meaningful here is Titan's Wrath mana cost going down. I actually kind of wish I went lower on this one. I think this could have been like 40 mana. 80 is way too high for this ability. I think 60 is still too high as well. But like, hey, Nautilus, you have to walk up to the lane and like last hit a cannon minion and a melee minion. And by the way, ask Kayle, gonna audio 3 times each, and you're gonna hate life. So it's 20 mana off the cost, so you can press this and not feel horrible, and it's 10 flat mana on the shield, so you can press it and not feel horrible. It's early game durability withstanding focused buffs for Nautilus, where you don't feel like such ass trying to do this kind of stuff. And then also, Riptide gets 5 damage per rank, and a very large increase in the AP ratio. I want to point out, I actually went still very, very soft on the ratio. This is almost 400 AP to double. It's still very, very soft. There was a version where this was like a 0.6 AP ratio, a 0.65. We were scared of AP lane Nautilus being a thing, so I kind of pulled back on this. There was a world where I bumped the E ratio and the R ratio, and I still think there's a world where follow-up on AP Nautilus is worth doing. I actually, at some point, kind of want to take a patch and open up some of these like AP tank builds. I think there's actually a lot of room for excitement there. I think the game feels better in solo queue if you're playing sort of slow, tanky, low target access bruisers. I think there needs to be a little bit better AP bruiser itemizations, another topic I want to tackle at some point. We'll see. But it's kind of a place my mind is in. But yeah, so what matters here? What are the numbers? Okay, well, here's Nautilus' passive auto damage. It's up by 6. It's not a huge deal, but again, his Q auto, trades are going to do 6 more damage. It's something, it's not a ton. If you're going to max E second, here's the amount of damage it deals. This is only on 1 wave. If you meditate all 3 waves, it'll deal double damage, but a bit more damage on this. So hey, a level 13 heavy trade is going to do 26 more damage, or maybe 36 more damage. Is that a huge amount? No, not really, but give it a bit more, maybe it feels okay. Want to point out, by the way, that E has a 10 mana cost increase on rank that is really quite high. It's really quite extreme. Again, there is some value in it because Emax top Nautilus, if it's good, is a really, really boring pro play champion. Like, if he's able to hold up at a mana cost because he, like, starts tier and goes Fimbulwinter, and by the way, Fimbulwinter works on slows for melee, so it's always on, he is untradeable against, he just wave clears, and unless you can actually make him build, like, an AP burst rate, which makes him a more exciting champion, like Gragas, it's really boring. So there is some concern that, like, this becomes a very boring top laner. I think tanks are reasonably fun in solo queue, because people are just, like, hectic enough, and it's cool, but I think tanks in lane are really boring in pro play, and it's a delicate thing. It's part of why, like, give them some AP ratios, make it exciting, because I think Gragas got in a good spot because you just build AP Gragas, and it's like, he's tanky, he does kind of tankish outputs, but, like, it kind of works. So, sort of the space I'm in there as well. But yeah, so here's, again, positive auto damage, E second damage. One thing I want to point out as well with data is, there is data to indicate that Emax first as support Nautilus is actually a very good build. It's certainly going to give you way more damage. E's rank up, even currently, like before this buff, is already like his best damage rank up. And as long as you're good about conserving mana, the 90 cost won't kill you because you're only going to be doing 2 all-ins. And you can actually have a lot of lethal threat by trying Emax first Nautilus. Keep in mind the slow also improves with rank. So there's a real world where Emax first is actually the play for him. Just like a consideration. It's really unpopular, but there's enough games to consider it somewhat reliable. And I urge you to try it out next patch. Either way, here is how much the shield is providing before and after. 10 flat shield, of course, is the difference. And yeah, a pretty solid increase, right? 10% more shielding, 10% more shielding in the early game. 10 flat shield is actually pretty valuable, pretty reliable, and because it's 20 mana cheaper as well, gonna feel decent. Again, I wish this actually went down to 40 here, but the weird thing is, so one thing I looked at, by the way, when I was talking about champions I was investigating, win rate wise, and who to target, there were a lot of champions where their resting solo queue win rates were already good. And that was the thing, that they were actually already successful in solo queue. So Rel, Taric, things like that, Leona, were all doing well in the current solo queue meta. They were already winning games. There were some champions like Nautilus who are actually somewhat elite skewed and somewhat pro skewed. He's like the only tank we see in pro play right now. And his win rate climbs with MMR pretty obviously, actually. It's pretty apparent. So if I can find ways to like give Nautilus some normal skew that can help. Leona, by the way, is inverse. She's actually normal skewed. And so unsurprisingly, we see Nautilus in elite play, and we don't see Leona in elite play, even though Leona's win rate for average players is higher than Nautilus's in the vaguely similar metagame. Minor stuff there, but still kind of true. But that's why some champs I went a lot softer on, and like didn't really try to give direct buffs to, or as heavily buffs to. Real quick though, here is his E damage with ability power. If you're gonna go ahead and stack rank E as much as possible, as early as possible. This is the damage of one wave, and indeed, AP Nautilus is going to do like 20 to 30% more damage on his primary damage ability. Now, we had Alistar earlier, who was gaining like 10 to 15% more damage than AP Alistar, but it was on all 3 of his core damage abilities. Nautilus here is gaining, 15 to 30% more damage, but only on the one ability, right? Q, W, R, none of them are getting any damage at all. I think could have maybe buffed them a little bit, but it's probably fine right now, but, wouldn't mind revisiting at some point in time. So there's that math. We're not doing APE damage here. It's just if you're going to max W second. Wait, no, I already have that. I don't know what this is. Wait, what is this? I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. We're going to move on. I did something weird. Oh, this is Pyke. This is Pyke E damage. Alrighty. So, I'm buffing Pyke because I think Pyke... so I initially had buffs for Pantheon as well. It's my fault that we didn't end up shipping any buffs here. I wanted to buff just straight up assassination damage increases for Pantheon, so that he could just flash W and your Pantheon plus Samira could just one-shot the Caitlyn support. And she just dies, and y'all can fuck off and stop playing Caitlyn support anymore. That was kind of the goal. Maybe that's not okay. But like that was the desire behind it. And then I got feedback that, hey, buffing his assassination-heavy outputs is going to disproportionately also buff him in mid, where mid is in solo queue really heavily squishy melees. Katarina, Zed, Yasuo, Yone, champs like this, right? And so I got the feedback like, if you want to buff him and equal out his matchups and make him a bit better in top lane where it's more fighter heavy, maybe, buff his jungle clear a bit so he can be a better jungler, which are the roles he's doing the worst at, you could buff things like attack speed and Q cooldown and Q cost. And he can kind of spam those, and, his top lane pattern against, like, Aurelia or Renekton can be about repeated Qs and whittling you down and playing it more as a fighter. And so that's why that changes was in my video last week. The weird thing with that was, now I wasn't really buffing Pantheon support anymore. And, like, I wasn't told, no, don't buff Pantheon. I was told, hey, here's what I think the effects are going to be. I'm suggesting an alternative. And I could have been like, noted. I could have done that, right? And then, like, okay, vet it through the actual vetting process of, like, get approval from the leads and get it to the gameplay analysis team and been like, we're buffing Assassin Pantheon. And us not even trying that is my fault. I regret not buffing Assassin Pantheon and telling the team, yeah, he's going to be 54% win rate in mid. Because the 8 most popular mid lane champions are all good Pantheon matchups. His win rate is purely a factor of the metagame in solo queue. We should not nerf him with a 54% win rate. And just be comfortable with that. Now, there's other work where it's like we can make him less of an anti-melee. Maybe also, other worthwhile work. And, take that kind of tactic and try to find a way around that and soften some of the matchups or whatever. That could have been a viable tactic, but ultimately we didn't even try, and that's my fault. But we are keeping the Pyke buffs. Now, I ended up going pretty light here. There was a version where E was getting its 40 bonus damage, and I was buffing the Q AD ratio. Ultimately, the feedback I got from the appropriate approval process of the high level players, there's a support who is currently GM right now, for example, in patch 13.1 early season solo queue. Dude's like, yeah, the team is like, this is probably too much for Pyke. I think this is well over target for what this buff is. You're buffing him by too much. And I could have gone for a softer one and kept the Q AD ratio to like buff it by 0.1 or 0.15 or something, and maybe should have done that. I was happy to go a little bit aggressive on Pyke buffs here, but I said, you know what, screw it. It's easy to just like revert the files on Q and just keep the E ship, and it's going to be enough. It's fine. But because Pyke, his only real output is ideal damage. And the thing with Pyke as well is his win rate curve falls off a cliff. He is an early game champion who does not have a mid and late game. And by giving him ability damage on his second max, by giving him AD ratio, which is going to scale natively with gold income, I was hoping to extend that lifetime out. In general, unless your champion screams, I have a fantasy, like Kayle, Kassadin, things like that. Tristana's level scaling on her attack damage range. Like, those things that say, hey, by the way, I uniquely scale on level. I should really be a late game kind of champion. Like, that's worth preserving and holding on to, and that's great. I think it's wonderful. You can let that exist, right? Nasus is kind of in this world. Vega's kind of in this world. Like, all that stuff is wonderful. I don't think we really sell, like, early game is my fantasy, but, like, champions end up being early game champions, and I think it's fine to generally soften that to some degree. It's okay if it exists. I'm not saying every champ should be flat, but like, if I'm going to buff Pyke, I'm going to try to buff his level 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, unless it was level 1. Though giving an AD ratio buff to Q, of course, would buff his level 1, because he has some AD via Spectral Sickle and everything else. Whatever. Either way, still shipping a moderate buff to Pyke E. Adding 40 damage does matter, right? This is 40 damage in the mid game. This is definitely a buff to Pyke. So here's the damage that his E deals before and after the patch. And yeah, pretty meaningful. Solid 10 to 11% damage increase, which is not nothing. Is it a huge buff? No, but Pyke is also not a horrible champion. So we'll see what happens. Now we go on to Rakan. Rakan was the product of a lot of back and forth. I'm not sure I shipped the right things for Rakan, but I had a lot of kind of competing goals here. So, number one, Rakan is already a successful solo queue champion. Like, his win rate is high. He is currently good in solo queue League of Legends. He also gets a little bit of pro play. Not a lot, but he gets a little bit of pro play. So he doesn't really need help per se. But I want to refresh and be like, hey, let's remind players this champion exists and be opportunistic where I can. So there's a couple things going on here. So one, I wanted to give Rakan some AP ratio buffs, and specifically offensive AP ratios, because his abilities, again, we can look at the numbers here, right? 80% of 270. This is 350 AP required to double the damage, right? You go here and like this is more than 400 AP to double the damage, right? This is a very bad AP ratio for a champ that is touted as like he's kind of an AP assassin kind of guy, bro. And it's still, this is like 300 and change, it's like 350. But this was like over 400, so it's like this is a bad AP ratio. There's no reason to build AP Rakan with bases and ratios like this. You'd rather just cast more spells or be tankier to do your job more reliably. So lower the base damage, increase the ratio is. This is probably not where I should have started, to be honest, but this allows AP Rakan to be better. I'm not doing this because of AP Rakan, to be clear. This is not because of AP Rakan. I'm just giving him a real AP ratio. Okay, let's move forward, though, from this. I ultimately looked at Rakan's numbers, and his damage is actually not too bad. He does pretty reliable damage. Q has decent base damage, W has decent base damage. But also keep in mind, he does emit healing, and he does have a passive shield, and he does have a shield to give his team, right? So, like, he has 3 defensive outputs and 3 offensive outputs. He is not just a damage champion. At least when I think when Rakan is healthy, he is not just a damage champion. Like, allowing him to play Q poke as a fallback pattern, that should be allowed. That should be a thing that he is allowed to do. Instead of being like, nope, Q sucks, fuck you. Your W all in, 200 base damage, let's go. Like, I don't think that's the coolest place for Rakan. Right now, Q is definitely his least interesting ability, right? The particles aren't great. The feedback on the heal isn't great. It is a little lackluster, and I think that is true. And so what I tried to do was buff the ability in ways that would at least feel good. So I'm not trying to make Qmax second good. Emax second is much higher win rate. It's more common, but I want to close the gap a little bit. Now, because Q doesn't have, it's not as cool of a skill as E. It's probably better that Rakan's power budget live in W and E and not Q, because just like the overall sell of the abilities are better. But that said, we can still make the ability not garbage. And so going from 5 heal per level to 10 heal per level, and the base being up by 10 as well. No AP ratio change, but just like the heal is actually good now and worth using. Like 100 point heal at level 18. Why? That is not a number. This doesn't exist. This is not good. So 210 is at least exists, and if you build some ability power, like this is reasonable. Mana cost down by 15, cooldown down by 1 says, yeah, I can play Q spam. There was a versus change list where Q got like 10 more damage per rank up and like 0.2 higher AP ratio on the damage. Grand Entrance just got an AP ratio increase and no damage decrease, and I might have even buffed the AP ratio on R. If people goes like, yo, listen, if Rakan R flashes, every ability lands, and if he has like a 3.0 total kit AP ratio, that's way the hell too much burst damage with no counterplay. You probably shouldn't ship this. I'm like, okay, fine, yeah, I shouldn't ship this. So I went a little bit softer than I might have on AP ratio buffs. Like this probably could have been 0.85 and it probably would have been okay. But ultimately, I didn't go as hard as I could have on making Q rank up better because WQ guaranteed to confirm damage is maybe not ideal gameplay. Maybe it would have been okay, but I got shy and said, okay, I'll listen to the feedback and I'm not going to push it through. If I was really confident and I wanted to fight for it, I could have fought for it. But this is one where I'm like, yeah, okay, let's not do that. But ultimately, yeah, Rakan is less of an all-in threat. But keep in mind that like his level 3 all-in does not deal less damage. His level 4 all-in does 5 less damage, but like, meh, who cares? But keep in mind also, again, the dude has ability power. So like, if he has, 15 ability power from starting runes and items, well, that's doing 1.5 more damage. So even then, his level 1 all-in literally does more damage than before. Is it by a lot? No, of course not. It's not. But like, hey, if I do a WQ level 1 trade, at level 2, I do, 1.5 more damage from W. My cooldown's up 1 second sooner, and I heal for 15 more, right? So like my WQ walk away trade or level 3 WQE jump back trade is like 20, 30 points better than pre-patch. And it costs less mana and the cooldown's lower. So it's like, that's actually pretty good. And honestly, like I was trying to buff these champions in ways that felt good to their kits. So like, yeah, Rakan has a weave in, weave out WQE gameplay. So I'm nerfing W damage as recompense for, this is a very big Q buff to make the ability freaking usable. Because it wasn't. Like this ability is ass, it shouldn't cost 60 mana, Hey, give him some slightly more real ability power ratios, and I kind of wish I'd done a bit more here, but they could have been meme buffs, so, let him feel like he's allowed to build. I don't know if Rocket Belt really makes sense, but like, let him feel like going Spell Thief's Edge makes sense on him, It's why, Nautilus's shield is cheaper. That's why Riptide does more damage and things like that. It's like, yeah, these are like important abilities, these characters, and they should feel good. And I have an eye towards ability ranks as well to try to like give you more choice in ability ranks. Speaking of choice in ability ranks, here's Thresh. Contrary to popular belief, Thresh does not actually have choice in ability ranks. You should never max Death Sentence. There's a bunch going on here. So there were a lot of versions of the Thresh change list. This is actually, I went through more iterations than any of the other champions. So I really believe in making Qmax his best rank. To do that requires a lot of work. So here's what's up. Thresh is very high elo skewed. Like by a lot, actually. And I think there are some fun and good ways to get rid of that elo skew. And it's largely based on Q rank actually being good. And what I still want to ship at some point is a buff to his passive. But here's the thing. Thresh, in his current holding pattern and overall solo queue, is not strictly weak. He's not strictly weak. He is... especially in higher elo, he's actually like a relatively strong champion. So I didn't have a lot of room to buff the champion. I'm not fully satisfied with my changes here, but I think we went in the right direction, and so I'm fine for now, but I would want to follow up. So as I said, you should not currently max Q on Thresh. 100 damage is enough to unlock your entire kit. The sooner you max the Lantern, the better, because you get 6 seconds off the Lantern cooldown. I think it goes from either 22 to 14 or 24 to 16. I think it's 22 to 6. I think it's 22 to 16. And it's like, oh, I could just make this like 20 flat. So yeah, late game you get fewer lanterns, or it's 21 to 17, so that the cooldown incentive is not quite as good. Or I could do something really dumb like 20 to 18 to get a half a second per rank up. But currently the W rank up is 1.5 second cooldown and 25 shield. It's like there's barely any shield on the rank up. It's just Lantern cooldown. And by the way, the sooner you max Lantern, the better. Like W max first is Thresh's highest win rate max. For like the ability he can already throw. But it turns out that shielding you and a teammate for 300 points every 16 seconds, because it combines, right? And it's 150 each, and then also it scales with souls, like that's like the least cool way to play Thresh is, like, do you play Thresh to play Janna? Is that the character? I shielded us, we did it. That's not why Thresh is cool, right? That's not why Thresh is cool. Thresh is cool because he hooks people and it's fucking awesome. So I personally have a pretty strong vendetta against WMax being optimal. Like, it should be wrong to max W, and the baseline utility should be high enough that, like, W feels good to use anyway. I think that's part of why it has a really kind of aggressive shield ratio. On souls, it's like, yeah, it's a 1-point wonder, but I have 80 souls, so it's a 200-point shield. Like, that's okay to me. I think that's fine. But it means that currently the cooldown incentive crushes everything because turns out you just want to spam shields on people. And so that, to me, kind of fails Thresh's fantasy. Cool Lantern plays are cool, but like I kind of want to crush the shield per soul even further. I kind of want to crush the cooldown incentive a little bit further, and I want to make the other ones better. By the way, also Emax also outranks Qmax in terms of incentive. So hoping to soften all these. So what's happening now? What are we actually doing here? What's actually shipping is a 5 damage per rank up a death sentence, which is a little bit to make Qmax a bit better. And one thing to point out as well with Thresh is low elo Thresh players, like 60% of like silver Threshes, max Q than E than W. Which to me, that's the promise of Thresh. I don't mind if there was room for other choices, but it's like by far his worst ability order and by far his most common ability order. Like that to me is a capital F fail we have screwed up over the course of time. My opinion anyway, because like that is the fantasy of the champion. It's why I'm going for these changes. Like, I really, really, really care about this. So it's like, okay, we make Qmax better by giving it 5 more damage per rank up. Also, we make Qmax better because there is a 2-second cooldown incentive per rank. It goes from, like, I think it goes from 19 to 11 per rank of Q. And so if we buff the AP ratio, aka damage per soul, if I have 50 Thresh souls, this goes from adding 25 damage to adding 40 damage. Oh, so we've also increased Death Sentence's base damage by 15, which makes getting a cooldown incentive on rank up more important. Because why wouldn't you want to cut 8 seconds off a 300 damage spell? That's overstating it. But like, so by buffing the AP ratio, we functionally buff maxing it, which is a good thing. Also by buffing the AP ratio, we buff soul collection, which is also a somewhat low elo skewed thing, which is a good thing because again, I would like to flatten the skill curve. Not the skill curve. Thresh has a ton of skill expression, and that is great. I don't want to kill skill expression. Landing hooks are actually pretty skillful, right? And even challenger players win more if they just max W instead, right? So it's like, hey, we're kind of failing some of the skill tests here, right? So Flay in a similar boat. It has 13 to 10 is the cooldown based on rank. I didn't ultimately want to actually make maxing it any really better or worse ultimately, but there's a typo in the patch notes here. It's going from a 0.4 to a 0.6 AP ratio. You notice that a 0.6 AP ratio means it's 350-ish, right? To double the damage of the ability. A 0.8 here is another 350-ish, double damage of the ability, right? Like, I'm trying to live in the low to mid 300s for these abilities too. I'm not saying that Death Cap Thresh is going to be a thing, but I'd kind of like if it was. I'll be honest. I kind of want Death Cap Thresh to be like a cool reach. Like, even thematically, Thresh going Magi Soul Stealer is a little thematic. It would probably be a win for the game if that happened. I'm just saying. So, but giving him not fucking horrible AP ratios is probably a good thing, right? So going in that direction. There was a world we go even more crazy. We go to 300 max rank here. The ratio could be even higher at, 0.85, 0.9. But ultimately, I settled on a change list that I thought was going to be a little bit lower risk. Maybe it could have gone riskier. But, objectively, there's more rank up damage. There's more damage here. There's more damage here. And then, yeah, I'm compensating some shield downs on the soul, right? If this ends up being win rate negative, I am sorry. I do want to do follow-up work on Thresh to make his ability orders better, to make him make more sense in the hands of more players. I think he's a cooler champion that way. And so there's another, just to kind of talk about Thresh a little bit longer, there was a Reddit comment I saw in the patch notes thread about like, but what about undoing the Drew ability update or whatever, or Thresh doesn't need this or whatever. It's like, no. Thresh is a damage champion. Like, Thresh to me is like ultra high agency cooler Pyke, right? I throw my long range Q, I land my stun combo in melee range, I'm like a little bit squishy and in danger, I've got to do the cool stuff around Fog of War plays with my Lantern, or, Pyke W, or what, like, he is a really, really high skill expression, kind of like Rakan as well, high skill expression, high mobility, high risk damage champion. If Thresh just builds Radiant Virtue and a Frozen Heart and just flays people on the front line and presses the box, that is a boring ass champion. If Thresh hooks you out of midair for 500 damage on a full combo and Lanterns in a Rakan who kills you from mid lane, like, that's a way cooler champion. So, like, I definitely want to design toward that being the character, because it's way cooler. It's just a way cooler champion than just like, well, I built full tank and I Lantern to connect into melee range. It's like, meh by comparison to me. That's my feeling anyway. And I'm not saying that I'm definitely right or that other people share my opinions or, that they're wrong or anything, but my view on the champion. So, all out of the way. Oh yeah, here's Rakan's Q cooldown from the previous patch. So let's look at it here, right? Here's a Q cooldown. 12 to 11, becoming 8 to 7. You probably still max this last, to be really clear, but hey, small cooldown cut here. Here's the amount of healing before and after. It is pretty substantially higher, right? Trending toward double, pretty big deal here. Again, getting 35 more points of healing on this ability is a really, really big change, right? Level 6 Rakan trades have 35 more health in their favor. It will always more than make up for like the damage lost, right? You lose 20 damage on W here, and you gain 50 back in healing. So like the sum total of the trade, if as long as you can land Q, is in your favor. You are a bit less bursty, but also welcome to Rakan. He's not just an engage tank. Q has a heal, it better matter. E is a shield, it better matter. His passive is a shield, it better matter. So let's well round him a bit more. Anyway, W damage again before and after. With ability power, like if you're going to build up to 180 or something, 270 ability power on this champion, you can see that AP Rakan does about the same damage, right? AP Rakan didn't really change. And so AP Rakan has the same W and those Q buffs. We're not close to AP Rakan mid being like overpowered or anything, but like FYI, pretty power neutral. Okay, so here's Thresh Q damage. So again, as I said, most players actually max Q first. And so with that in mind, if we take an approximation of about 1 soul at level 1 and then just 5 souls per level from there onwards, that's a guess, but it means we're at 91 souls at level 18. If it should be more than that, fair enough. Pretend these numbers are higher. But here is the total damage of his Q before and after. And it's like, Yeah, its ability to only, like, at 90 souls, this ability to 300 damage only. Like, Pyke does that by itself at level 9. And is arguably an easier ability to hit if you're Pyke, to be fair. So now it's, like, at least a bit more respectable, 350. It's something. Here's the E damage with the 0.4 to 0.6 AP ratio. It's not a huge difference, don't get me wrong. It's not a very big difference, but it is there. So, like, hey, if you're going to max E second, we get a solid, like, almost 40 damage off of Q and 10 damage off of E. So level 13 Thresh does 50 more damage. Like, that's a pretty meaningful amount of extra of punishment, and I think it's kind of cool. I think that's a good place for us to be. I want to skew him towards damage. Of course, keep in mind with that same thing in mind. Here's the shielding, and by the way, the shield, honestly, is still pretty decent, right? This is still a pretty okay shield, level 13. It's still 134 in the base shield, and you're still 1.1 ring it. I don't know, to me this seems fine. This seems like an acceptable amount of shielding to give. And of course, you still pull a little safety, right? Like, you still have that baseline utility. And so, personally, to me, I think this champion is still quite functional, and it's totally solid stuff. Really cool change here. The way Tenacity now works is sources within the same group stack multiplicatively with one another. So, Mercury Treads, and Elixir of Iron, and Iceborne, people go Iceborne, but like Mercury Treads, Legendacity, Unflinching, now for sure scale multiplicatively, aka worse, with each other. So if I cut, let's say this was 33% Tenacity, it's not. Let's say it's 33% Tenacity. Instead of cutting it, potentially, 33 minus 33 is 66, aka I have 66 Tenacity. I cut all CC duration to 1/3. It's, 0.67 times 0.67 is roughly 0.5. I cut stun durations in half. So whatever is remaining is then multiplied again by whatever's remaining, is multiplied again by whatever's remaining. So like if I pick Green Smite and we get Chemtech Drakes and I go Unflinching and Tenacity and Merc Treads, and by the way, I bought like only one of these things cost gold. And the rest of these just happen because Green Smite is probably just generically just the best smite. Chemtech Dragons, I have no choice over. Unflinching Tenacity. It's like, oh, well, I picked a fighter and I went Conqueror. I'm not going Bloodline. Very few of us can go Legend Alacrity and care about it. So I went Conqueror. So I must do this. I need Second Wind. So I must do this. And it's like, and we got Chemtech Drake, so I just have a ton of Tenacity. I didn't even try. Okay, well, at least they scale multiplicative with one another, so they don't go quite as hard, right? Like, that is a good thing. I'm glad about that. Now, across groups, it will add. So let's say I have Mercury Treads 33%, and then Unflinching 33%, so I have 50% Tenacity coming out of Group A. All right, I've cut them in half. Okay, well, now I have Silvermere Dawn. Okay, well, Silvermere Dawn, if it gives, or Cleanse. Cleanse has, like, what, like 33 or 50% Tenacity on it? Okay, well, now they can add together, and I can, like, actually be... I think there is a lower cap to the amount of... Tenacity you can actually stack, like a low amount that stuns will actually last on you. But it means that like there are exceptions for exceptional cases, so that like if we need to hard buff your champion because you just need Tenacity to function as actually, so Darius and Mid are already good, but like I don't know if a Kayle needs Tenacity to function in ARAM without just giving her double the damage. Okay, well, you get an additive Tenacity buff. Go for it. Silvermere Dawn is a very special active. Cleanse a pretty special active. I think there's a case where these all could have been in Group A, honestly, but like, whatever, who cares? It's fine. This just means that basically these things scale really well with these things, right? Here's all the generically available stuff, that if you go Cleanse or go Silvermere Dawn, they're exceptionally good alongside this stuff. Similarly, Garen W is exceptionally good alongside Merc Treads. So Garen W actually scales really, really well with Merc Treads. You can like really, really crush CC duration if you time Garen W well. Or in a similar boat. So right, short duration applied Tenacity situations. So, Courage stacks additively with Cleanse, which then stacks additively with Mercury Treads. So that's kind of the rundown how that works. I think it's kind of interesting, cool stuff there. So next up is a set of jungle adjustments. I want to get some context here, because I saw some complaints on the internet about it. So right now, jungle is overpowered. Jungle is overpowered, and the current jungle meta is Clown Fiesta bot lane. You should probably just 3-camp gank bot every single game. Probably. Just, like, kind of just do it. If your default pattern is, I'm going to go for 6-camp clear and then fight for Scuttle, change that. Make your default pattern Red Raptors Gromp bot gank, and then clear your rest of your camps back up. Like, go do Red Raptors Gromp gank bot lane. If you get a kill, shove in the lane. And then, like, if it's there, go fight Scuttle. Otherwise, grab Blue Wolves and then recall, or recall and then Krug's Raptors, clear bot. Like, something like that. I don't know. Makes, figure out what your jungle path's actually going to be. But, like, your default should probably be 3-camp bot lane. That is kind of the best way to play League of Legends right now. Now, we are trying, and I don't have a direct canvas. This is not my set of changes. I did not design or plan or implement these. But it would be better if junglers weren't incredibly overpowered and there was a better balance between farming and ganking. This does not aim to completely solve that issue. This is much like there being a Kassadin nerf and a Nautilus buff. This aims to improve the balance of the game. Because I buff support tanks and nerf Kassadin, is the game perfectly balanced, chat? No, it's not. The game is not perfectly balanced. Has the game got more balanced than it was last patch? That's the hope, right? That the overall game will be a better experience to watch, to play, to all those things, right? So is this going to silver bullet jungle's perfect now? No. And we don't think so either. But on fairly low turnaround time, we started planning these changes relatively recently, shipping some low risk, moderate impact, directionally good jungle changes to improve the experience somewhat. Those are all true statements. So it irks me a bit to see complaints about, like, XD, they're doing nothing. It's like, no, the jungle is objectively overpowered. They should be less powerful, and they're especially overpowered early game. They should especially be less powerful there, and they're especially overpowered as ganking junglers, and they should be less powerful there. All of those things are happening in this patch. So jungle per treat is functionally a gold per 10 metric. What's weird is people were saying things like XD, you're not actually nerfing ganking junglers. It's like, this is functionally gold per 10, and this is XP for power clearing, right? So there is an amount of junglers are getting more experience and less gold, especially if you're not power clearing for gold. So what is the math here? Okay, so here's what this means, by the way. I know it's very exciting math, but here we have it. Treats spawn every minute after about, 2.5 minutes in the game, or whatever the number actually is. They spawn every minute. So 30 gold a minute is 5 gold per 10. 20 gold per minute is 3.333 gold per 10. Okay, so the jungle item had 1.666666 gold per 10 removed from it. For context, support items have a passive 2 and then eventually 3 gold per 10 on them. And champions natively gain 20.1 gold per 10. So you go from about 25 to 23, essentially passive gold per 10. Is it a massive change? No, it is not a massive change, but it means that if you're not focusing on your own econ, you're getting support item levels of guaranteed money, where once you consume the treats, you get the money for it, right? Is it large? No. Is it something? Yeah, it's a bit less flat gold across the class for doing nothing. Also, you're getting 5 more XP per camp. So what this is saying, okay, how much gold am I getting? Let me think about this correctly. So this is right. Okay, this is, I believe, how much gold this item is generating you across 2 full clears of your jungle. So let's say you are doing completely full clear, right? You are doing it's 8 minutes in the game or whatever, and you clear all your camps top to bot, and then 2.5 minutes later you clear all your camps top to bot, right? One of the times you got red and blue, one of them you didn't, which means you killed 10 camps. If you killed 10 camps, it means you got 50 experience, right? If you do 2 full clears of your jungle, 2.5 minutes apart, you get 50 more experience. You also get 50 less gold. Now the thing is, if you're a ganking jungler, you still get 50 less gold, but you don't get 50 more experience. Now again, even for a farming jungler, you are still weaker. A decent ballpark is that XP is worth 0.5 gold. It is very generally true. It changes by champion. It changes by what level you are. But as an okay rule of thumb, champions did get nerfed by 25 gold if you full clear. If you don't full clear, you got nerfed by 40 gold because you weren't clearing all these camps. You weren't getting all the XP that got buffed in, but you were still getting the treat gold, right? So people who are skipping camps mid to late game, or skipping camps in general, are getting nerfed more than those who are full clearing. And again, the goal is still to nerf jungle overall. So the jungle is getting nerfed overall. Less gold, bit more XP, especially less XP, and you're not getting much of that XP back if you're playing a ganking jungler. All right, next change. Trinket Ward cooldown, going from 4 minutes to 3.5 minutes at level 1. I'm pretty sure the scale is linearly based on character level, but essentially a bit more access to trinkets early on in the game. So your first one comes in at 3.5 instead of, well, your first repeat ward comes at 3.5 instead of at 4 minutes. Give you a bit more room to find yourself onto a ward for like the second path down. Keep in mind that usually if a jungler starts on one side of the map, that camp respawns at about 4:30. It's usually a little bit sooner, especially like the Raptors start. It's sooner than that, but like it's reasonable to be like, yeah, if you're doing like blue Gromp and then across the map, it's like 4:15, 4:20, 4:30 is like roughly the area where that thing respawns. 4:30 is like a bit late to be clear, but like 4:10, 4:15, 4:20, 4:30, something around there is like, that's the area it respawns as like a decent rule of thumb. I'm saying 4:30 because it's really easy to remember that, like, you know, I guess here, I'll put it this way, right? Let's say you're playing bot lane and you know that the enemy jungler started bot side and they did like a blue Gromp to top side, right? Their Gromp's coming up at 4 minutes and X, which means if the clock reads 4 minutes, that jungler is gonna be on your side of the map waiting for Gromp to respawn, which means you're gankable again, because they might get you before they start their next route. Which meant, by the way, that like if you were exactly on it, that means you could drop your ward at exactly 4 minutes and maybe catch the jungler in time. But now if the ward's up at, 3:30, well, guess what? That means you can definitely drop your ward in time, and you'll know if the jungler is coming, he's for sure skipping camps to do it, because if you drop your ward at 3:30 and lasts for a minute, or lasts for 90 seconds or whatever, and it's like it's 5 minutes in and they're still down here, hey, their top camps are up, go kill their Krugs and Raptors, their top camps are up. Like, this actually matters quite a bit in terms of the actual timing of how this ends up lining up with jungle pathing. So this, I think, is something pretty useful here, right? So yeah, the vision can hopefully help dodge from getting super ganked by the enemy jungler. See if we can do that. So ganking success also can be really, really scary. Functionally buffing early turret damage. So buffing early turret damage by more than 10%, right? 162 becomes 182. Now it's trending towards just the same number, right? 344 becomes 350 at 14 minutes is about the same number, but substantially increased turret damage, especially early on in the game. So that when you're against Ashe Caitlyn bot lane and they slow push and dive you on wave 3, and you're still level 1, and their jungler finished their 3 camp clear in their bot lane, well, the turret does 20% more damage, okay, 10 to 15% more damage, which in a lot of cases is going to be that one extra hit. Because, hey, if you're playing Braum or Leona or Nautilus or whatever, it's like, yeah, okay, as Braum, we Q auto the Viego or Lee Sin or Xin Zhao or Vi or Sejuani together. And now that, like, 50% more turret damage might get us that kill. Because as long as we apply crowd control, the turret will kill the level 3 jungler for us. And so you can get a lot of extra safety that way. So, anti-early dive strength, a pretty good thing. I'm actually very happy that turret damage is going up. Now, last time Riot buffed early turret damage was with the durability update, and it really crushed early game damage output. Like, early game tower diving was way, way, way down. Pro lethality was way, way, way down. And there is a risk this ends up making pro play more boring if you're relying on tower dives to get your kills. So there is some risk there, but a substantial turret damage increase means that if you're getting tower dove and supporting in bot lane, you've got a much higher chance of getting a trade kill, which means you're going to be much less screwed if you do get tower dove. Another minor change, your jungle companion is no longer dealing with epic monsters, so you have to last them yourself. Reasonable's up there. Land your right laner, auto attack. Okay, great. Alrighty. Moving on to not much else left to look at. Ari's ASU is coming. And some animation stuff coming with the Jax midscope. Animation, sounds, VFX, all that cool stuff. Wonderful stuff here. Great. Wonderful. All right, 2 hours in, as has been the tradition so far in these patch rundowns. Let's try to TLDR what this patch has in store for us. First up, the Aurelion Sol. Something gameplay update. I don't know what the C stands for. I'll be honest, I don't know. But a comprehensive gameplay update. I'm just going to pretend that's what it is. A comprehensive gameplay update for Aurelion Sol looks pretty cool. Infinite attacking passive. Honestly, Champ looks really sick. Looking forward to it. It should be really, really nice. Amumu gets 5 mana cost increase on his E. Tantrum -15 to +5 on tantrum damage. Should lower his early game clear a little bit. Certainly lowers his early trading in lane. Moderate size, small to moderate nerfs for support and jungle together. Annie getting a cool set of updates. Her passive now stacks fully on spawn and respawn. Her Molten Shield is much, much stronger with a lower cooldown. Much more retaliation damage, but it's only once per enemy per hit. But it also now works on spells. So pretty big deal there. Much more reliable. Theoretically, less total damage, potentially if they're going to multi-hit you, but way more reliability and a really cool change overall. Timbers gets a bit of health and armor MR scaling with AP. This is actually very, very light. I wouldn't really worry about it. And a bit more move speed at rank 2 and 3 the ultimate, which is kind of nice. These aren't really huge, but they're going to feel really good, even though they aren't actually a lot of power. Overall, I think there's actually some really, really good changes, and I think it's really awesome. Jarvan gets 2 armor, a pretty meaningful increase in shield strength. This ends up actually being a pretty solid, like 20 to 40% more shield in a lot of contexts over the course of time, and a lower cooldown is a pretty big deal as well, so a very large buff to his W, which should be quite nice. Kassadin gets some health growth. Overall, though, much less crowd control. Knockup duration down by 0.35. The overall max stun, instead of being 1 to 1.25, is just a flat 1. This would be fluctuating based on like game ticks and stuff. Additionally, now means that you can use Tenacity to get out of his overall CC chain much faster. Merc Treads will drop this to a flat 0.65 second CC, which is a pretty cool thing. Pathbreaker has much less short stun on tap. Okay, cool. And then a bit squishier during All Out, which is also a good change, I think. Kassadin are some nerfs that I shipped. Functionally, much less early trading, 20 to 0 less damage on E, 10 to 30 less damage on Riftwalk. The 30 is what the max stack Riftwalk damage would be, but just 10 flat and 5 per stack. These scalings are all the same as what they were before. Mostly early trading gets hit there because you get more ability power, more mana, and more ability ranks. You know, this is going to be the same damage before. This is going to be nearly the same damage before. Also, though, the E cooldown refresh is going to be less ubiquitous in the really big team fight, so much less E spam for him as well. So much less of a DPS thing. This actually should be a pretty big nerf overall. Should feel it quite a bit. Kayle gets what ends up being maybe slightly too light of buffs, but more move speed on her passive when fully stacked, as well as a 5% AP ratio increase on her on-hit damage of the E. I think this ends up actually being a pretty meaningful buff. I'm going to guess it's really only about 1% for Kayle, but still a buff overall, and maybe we can go for a bit more later, but for now, this is what we have with Kayle. Kayn getting some blue Kayn specific buffs. His passive increased damage during blue Kayn, as well as his Q damage that only applies during untransformed and blue Kayn. Solid damage increase here. Should be pretty small, but still a good set of changes. LeBlanc gets much softer mana constraints, with Q getting a flattened cost and mana regen going up pretty substantially both level 1 and later onto the game, as well as some small Mimic cooldown buffs. Should feel pretty really good. I think Mimic is really excitement up, which is nice, and hopefully people enjoy this and could do better with LeBlanc. Lee Sin are changes that I shipped. He is getting a total damage ratio on E. This is a 3 damage increase at character level 1 if you were to start E at level 1. If you learn it at like level 2 or 3, it's more than that. It's going to be closer to 10. But overall, a pretty meaningful damage increase since the 30 damage per rank is staying the same. But as his base AD increases, the damage of E goes up and up and up. And so it's a pretty solid mid to late game damage increase on him, as well as the rank of incentive on E goes up in terms of getting an increased slow value. And then finally, a 0.1 bonus AD ratio increase as well on Lee Sin. I'm mostly just trying to give him more mid to late game power to make sure that he can feel just sort of better in the late game, where he can do more than just the ward hop kicks, but has a fallback pattern of being an okay damage champion and getting stuff done there. Trundle 2 seconds on the W cooldown is just nice. I think there's a chance that W max first is actually the optimal way to build Trundle. I recommend trying it out. I think it could be quite good for him. Zach loses some AP ratio on his W and some AP ratio and base damage at end ranks on his E, ends up being a pretty substantial damage decrease of around 10% in both cases, especially for AP building Zacs. This definitely matters quite a bit. And yeah, this should be felt quite a bit as well, because Radiant Virtue is, I hope, actually getting nerfed this patch. Speaking of Radiant Virtue, I am nerfing it. Total cost is up, cooldown is up, which is mostly a karma nerf. And you no longer give allies and yourself non-ultimate ability haste when you activate Guiding Light. This is a pretty big deal overall. These are obviously, right, strict nerf, strict nerf, strict nerf, and then instead, of the heal being variant based on how much max health you have. I am making the tooltip just tell you, here's how much total healing the item provides. The number, spoiler alert, is actually quite large. It's a quite meaningful amount of healing overall, and it gives you even more max health than before. So even though it's got a longer cooldown and there's no haste, it is overall a better selfish stat stick in terms of durability, and it's a better team-wide stat stick for healing in most contexts. And we'll see how much that actually feels like, but that's kind of the goal. So more of the power cares about what your max health is, because the heal is all cared about your health, whereas the ability haste didn't care who you were. It was a karma presses R and laughs all the way to the bank kind of thing. So happy with this change so far, and we'll see if there's going to be a larger scope version of this item later on down the line. Next up, Umbral Glaive gets 10 seconds of the cooldown, and ranged champions only do 2 damage to wards now, so it takes 2 shots to kill green wards. And they also don't one-shot traps anymore. Overheal is another one of my buffs. This was meant to go with the 80 core update in 13.2 / the micro patch, but didn't ship with the changes because it was a micro patch. So this is a buff from level 5 onwards, and a very meaningful buff around like 30, 40, 50%, around level like 14, 15. This is a pretty big deal. This is a lot of durability for 80 carries. If they want to opt out of Presence of Mind or opt out of Triumph and get a anti-burst tool for the games where it's going to feel really bad. I think this makes the rune live in a pretty healthy spot where you can come in and be like, okay, this game is scary for me. They've got a Talon, they've got a Katarina, they've got all kinds of crazy stuff that I really can't deal with. It's an Overheal angle. It's a shield bow angle. It's a Bloodthirster angle. We're going to go build defensive, and we can kind of like opt into the tailor-made 80 core defensive options while still getting damage, having to go for things like Death Stance that's not really made for you. That's kind of the hope here, and we'll see if that happens. That's the hope. I then shipped a whole bunch of melee tank buffs. So, Alistar heals himself for more, his teammate for less. This ends up being about the same amount of total health healed in lane, but much more skewed toward him. Also, it scales the items. It just looks way the hell cooler, being a max health heal instead of scaling with level. I'm a really big fan of this. I even scripted it myself. I learned how to script abilities to look at, stats on the champion and whatnot. I'm getting better at the tools. Feels really gratifying to be able to do this kind of stuff. Very happy with it. Happy with the Alistar changes so far. Massively lower mana cost. Basically, your full combo costs 20 less mana to QWE, WQE, whatever. AP ratio massively increased as well, 0.2, 0.2, and 0.3. I don't expect lane AP Alistar to be dominant, but you do get a bit of damage going things like Shrelia's, going for any kind of AP items out there. If you get ahead, maybe go Demonic Embrace, feel good about it, who knows, but those kinds of items I think are allowed to feel good. If you get an Infernal Soul, if you have, AP stat shards, things like that, if you want to go Gathering Storm for some reason, like being allowed, even if you can't go Demonic, right? But like, no, it's actually correct for me on Alistar to get Gathering Storm and, Eyeball Collector and like actually feel good about getting some ability power and my Relic Shield upgrading all the way and getting AP. Like, I want those to feel good and feel like you're getting something out of it. So really want to try to give these champions good AP ratios. Braum gets his passive quota just simply scales at 1, 6, and 11. So it lines up with his ulti rank, which I think is just the right way to design his abilities. Early when his bite cooldown is down, so you can trade a little bit better with ranged champions. Braum is still unfavored to basically all ranged matchups, but has some gameplay here where he can at least fight back a little bit more, and just W feeling a bit better with a 10 flat shield, 10 flat armor and MR at level 1, and then 14 more at level 5 of the ability. Just feel a little bit better, kind of nice stuff there. Nautilus plus 6 damage on the passive, 20 mana cost off the W, 10 flat increase on the shield, and 0 to 20 increased damage on Riptide, plus a pretty decent bump to the AP ratio. This AP ratio is absolute dog shit. This one is still pretty bad. It's almost 400 AP to double, but didn't want to go too hard and risk lane Nautilus being too good. AP, Doran's Ring, Fimbulwinter Nautilus certainly has the ability to be very, very scary, so I was a little conservative here, but either way, I think it's fine right now. But something I definitely have on my mind of maybe we could kind of buff the off builds as long as we get him to not too bad of a spot. But there's a longer discussion around like buffing a meme build but not to viability. Is that a bad thing? Like if we're gonna buff this guy's scalings and AP ratios, like, or is it still a bad build, or is it just like, well, ancillary AP you got via Baron buff is good enough, but you're not gonna play the build for real. Like that matters, right? Like that distinction. So it's a discussion to be had. We'll figure it out. But moving on. Pyke gets 40 flat damage at max rank of the E. This pushes his damage up through the mid-game quite a bit better. Honestly, this is still a pretty weak base damage for a champion that doesn't have a W to rank up for any damage. So, I don't know, there's something there, but either way, Pyke, his entire role is damage. He falls off a cliff after the early game, and so a bit more damage is going to help with that. Rakan is getting, I would almost argue, a little bit reshaped. He's certainly losing damage on W, 5 damage off per rank after rank 1. So he's not really getting any more all-in threat. Yes, there's an AP ratio increase, but unless you're going to get 200 AP, it's not going to increase the damage here. But what is happening, though, even though he's losing up to 20 damage, more like 18 damage because you have some baseline AP in this champion, on his W, he's getting 1 second cooldown off the Q, 15 mana cost off the Q, and a pretty substantial 10 to like 100 bonus healing on the Q as well, which is really meaningful in terms of making that matter. And it means that Rakan is less of an all-in threat, because again, he's literally less of an all-in threat, but it means that he can go for his, Q, like W in, Q auto, run away, or E away trades, or he can go for Q poke and it's more reliable. But giving him more of a combat pattern, I think, is a good thing. Landing Q skill shots is a bit of a skill test. I just think this allows him to be a more well-rounded champion because he is not an all-in mage, right? He is not Rakan. He's not Pantheon. Sorry, he's not Pyke. He's not Pantheon. He's not Nautilus, where he's like, he kind of only goes forward. He's not Leona. He doesn't just go forward. He has this give and take, this push and pull, and letting the pull actually be good is what I wanted here. And so, yeah, he gets to be more well-rounded champion. I think it's a good thing. Thresh's damage goes way up. He gets 5 more points of damage per rank up on Q. He also gets 0.3 more damage per soul picked up. So every 10 souls is 3 more damage. He gets another 0.2 damage per soul on his E as well. This is a 0.6 AP ratio right here. So also meaningful damage increase there. There's a world where like this damage can go up by another 5. This can go up by another 5. The other stuff we can do here. But ultimately, Q max on Thresh is what people tend to do, but it's not actually correct on him, and I want to rectify that. I actually do want to do more work on Thresh, just as simply like I want to fix the ability rank ups. I want them to look nicer. This actually matters to me quite a bit. I want to go in and kind of make that look a bit better. So I want to investigate that and make that kind of stuff look nice. But regardless, damage is definitely up. Shielding is down. Overall power probably going to be relatively neutral. We'll see. We'll see which way it goes. Tenacity is getting somewhat recoded to work in very specific ways. So tenacity items within a group scale multiplicatively, aka poorly, with one another. And then across groups are additive, aka scale really, really well with one another. So Mercury Tread scales really, really well with Cleanse, for example. You add the numbers together and you approach 100% tenacity or something like that. It's definitely going to be a relatively powerful thing overall. Moving on from that, though, we have jungle adjustments. Functionally, this is overall a nerf to junglers. If you are power clearing, you're going to get more experience than before. No matter what, though, you're losing about 1.6 gold per 10. It's not actually a ton, right? It's 10 gold per minute, which is 1.6 gold per 10. That is not a very large nerf. It is a nerf. It is less gold overall to junglers, but it's not a very large one. You'll note, though, that it's a flat, functionally gold generation going down, which is skewed towards punishing gank-heavy junglers more than farm-heavy ones, because the farm-heavy ones at least get some XP back and get nerfed less hard, right? So they get a little bit of something back from themselves. Trinket Ward cooldown going down by 30 seconds in early levels, going to certainly matter a fair bit here. And then turret damage up by about 15% in the early game, also going to matter quite a bit in terms of surviving early on tower dives. Definitely a pretty big deal there. So cool changes. Version 1 of doing some jungle adjustments on the new season. Jungle is definitely very overpowered, and it's really, really about spam ganking bot lane, so loosening that up I think is a pretty positive thing. So we have managed to do a 2 hour and 20 minute patch rundown. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.